Okay, we're live, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Committee, it's great to see you all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to go. It's good to be in this historic chamber. What a great place for a meeting. It's good to see everyone. Would you please take roll, Carissa? Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call for the Joint Judiciary Committee for September 19th. Senator Case? Senator Case?
Excused.
Senator Cooper? Here. Senator Furphy?
Here.
Senator Schuler?
Here.
Representative Chestic?
Excused.
Representative
I think he's gonna
Craigo?
be on Zoom. Is he on Zoom yet? Representative Shestak?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see him on Zoom just yet. Representative Craigo? Here. Representative Haroldson? Here. Representative Jennings? Here. Representative Nemec?
Here.
Representative Oakley?
Here.
Representative Provenza?
Here.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams? Here. Co-Chairman Washut?
Here?
Chairman Landon?
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. First order of business committee is approval of minutes. We've been asked to formally do that, so I would accept a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, moved by the co-chairman, seconded by Senator Cooper. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. The minutes have been approved. So committee, again, welcome. I wanted to bring up something real quickly before we get started this morning. I've had the pleasure of serving as your chairman of the Exhibit and Wayfinding Committee, which is a committee that's been working the past 3 years to finish up the Capitol. Presented yesterday to one of our select committees to catch them up. It's actually a pretty exciting time for us because all of that effort of picking out paint colors and what color the curtains will be has all been put in the past, and we're beginning some of the installment. And so I brought this packet that gives you an idea of a few of the things that you'll begin to see around the Capitol and into the extension and over to the Hirschler building. The wayfinding, of course, is very important, but also the public meeting rooms. I think you'll be pleased the next time you see them. There's pretty beautiful seals of the great state of Wyoming in each one of those meeting rooms now, and the flags are up, and you'll see more and more this fall as we go on through. And so anyway, if you'd like to take a look at this packet through the day or tomorrow, I'll just have it right back here. And so with that, we have a heavy agenda. We've got some good policy considerations today, and I look forward to all the input from the committee. Mr. Co-Chairman, opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Just to echo that welcome. This is my favorite room in the Capitol. I just like being in here. It's just beautiful, and you think about the history of the great state and everything that's taken place in this room, including the signing of women's suffrage, and it's just humbling to have an opportunity to be in this room and think about all that. And we do have a heavy agenda, so I'll keep my remarks very brief.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. And we are blessed to have a visitor. Madam Attorney General is here, and we're going to get started with some remarks from our Attorney General. And thank you very much for being here. We look forward to having a conversation to start the day. So,
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today, and thank you for characterizing my appearance as a blessing. I don't know that that's ever been done before, so I'm going to treasure that. I'm going to grab onto that for the whole day. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm pleased to be here to give you a brief update of things going on in the Attorney General's office. Like you have both mentioned, you do have a heavy agenda, so I don't intend to take a whole bunch of time. Additionally, I note on your agenda that many of the things pertaining to my agency are on your agenda, and so I wouldn't expect to mention those specifically in my general update. I'll leave those to their spot in the agenda, and I will give a more general overview so as not to be duplicative for you today. But of course, I would answer any questions along the way. As you know, our agency is made up of 6 units. We have the Law Office, we have the Division of Criminal Investigations, we have the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy, we have the Police Officers Standards and Training, we have the Victim Services Division, and we have the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. Those are all part of the Attorney General's office. I think sometimes we all focus on the Law Office and maybe DCI, but we have those 6 units that are all part of our office. And I would describe the work of each of those divisions as generally going well and proceeding along. We have professional, dedicated, hardworking people working in our agency, and we're very proud of that. Of course, like all agencies and entities, we experience challenges along the way. And we have experienced some of those this year. I'll touch briefly on some of them. But if you were to ask me to describe generally the state of our agency, I would describe the state of our agency as good and stable. That's how I believe our agency has proceeded this year. I'll just give, like I mentioned, a few brief highlights. I'll start with the Law Office. The Law Office, of course, is generally the entity responsible for representing the state of Wyoming and doing the legal work for the state of Wyoming. Just to give you a flavor of what that is, we are advising all the state agencies on a day-to-day basis. We advise the executive branch elected officials. We actually represent the judicial branch and judges when they're sued. We prosecute all criminal appeals before the Wyoming Supreme Court. We take care of all post-conviction matters, both in state and federal court. We take care of termination of parental rights cases. We, of course, are the entity, and we've been in the news plenty this year, we're the entity responsible for prosecuting and taking cases against the federal government that we believe are inconsistent with the interests of the state of Wyoming. We've had a lot of that this year. We represent the state of Wyoming when they're sued for money damages. Many things, I haven't mentioned them all. 2 things I would mention that people maybe don't think of when they think of the Attorney General's office. We are responsible for investigating and prosecuting Medicaid fraud. We're also the entity responsible for looking after the Wyoming Consumer Code. We have a consumer protection unit, and we try to help the citizens of the state of Wyoming as they are consumers and protect them. And so those are some things that we do. Over the year in the law office, I would say it's been a busy year. To give you just a little bit of the flavor of that, obviously I couldn't collect all the statistics, but I just wanted to give you a good sense of some that are easily obtainable. We've filed 32 criminal briefs that have resulted in opinions out of the Wyoming Supreme Court. We will be on pace to file 50 before the end of the year. That's approximately how many we had last year. But what is up is we've also filed approximately 25 other briefs in the Wyoming Supreme Court. So those would be civil matters, those would be tax matters, those would be termination of parental rights briefs, those would be things related to tort. So that number is up a little bit. So we have been busy in front of the Wyoming Supreme Court. We have filed to date 30 termination of parental rights in 2024. We estimate we'll file 15 more before the end of the year. Last year, we only filed 37, so that casework is up a little bit. Our Human Services Division is experiencing more work related to protecting children and terminating parental rights when reunification of the family just simply is not successful. We have, and as I mentioned, the big news, of course, filing suits against the federal government excuse me, we have approximately 15 water and natural resources cases pending. That's the most we've ever had in that unit, and most of that is related to actions taken against the federal government. Excuse me, I apologize. But additionally, sometimes the federal government does things that are helpful to the state of Wyoming. And so sometimes we do intervene on their behalf as well to defend their decisions if they're helpful to the interests of the state of Wyoming. But that unit has been very busy this year as well. We have reviewed 7,150 contracts. We're on pace to review 9,000 before the end of the before the end of the year. And if, just to give you context of how much busier we are there, in 2023, we reviewed 7,495 contracts. So we have significantly more contracts we're reviewing this year. We think some of that's related to the end of biennium. Of course, there's always contracts at the end of a biennium where people are trying to utilize the money that's been appropriated to them from the legislature. And so that number is a little up. So like I said, law office been pretty busy. The one case by name or topic I would mention in the law office specifically because it pertains significantly to the legislature would be our school finance. We did have school finance litigation this year related to the constitutionality of the funding that the legislature has provided to our school systems. That trial proceeded in June of this year here in Cheyenne. It was approximately a 6-week trial. Currently, the district court had requested proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law, and we're working on those. Those are due to the court October 25th. And so we're making our proposed findings, drafting our proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law. It's never wise to speculate about what the outcome of any particular case might be, and so I won't. What I will tell you related to that case is we felt positive about the evidence that we presented and highlighting the relevancy and importance of that evidence. We felt positive about the record that we have created in front of the court because this case, regardless of the outcome in the district court, is destined for the Wyoming Supreme Court. Whichever side is unsuccessful in front of the district court will likely take an appeal to the Wyoming Supreme Court. So it was very important to us to make sure we created a good record, and we did do so, we believe. The thing I would mention there, again, I don't want to speculate about the outcome, but I would put it this way. I don't believe we experienced any hiccups in that litigation that we weren't expecting. And so that is the posture of that case right now, and we're very hopeful for the outcome there, recognizing it will be a long haul because it will end up in front of the Wyoming Supreme Court. And that's all I would mention related to the law office. For DCI, I would mention, of course, some of my people will be in front of you related to DCI. So the only thing I would bring up related to DCI for you relates to the lab. First of all, we're very, very proud of the work of all of DCI, but we're very proud of our state crime lab. They do a tremendous job. In fact, they received an award this year, and because I love to highlight the good work of the lab, I would mention that to you. They received the Foresight Maximus Award for 2023, and that award is given by an international, they do an international business evaluation of scientific laboratories, and it includes local, state, national, and international labs. And a Maximus Award winners are operating at 90% or better peak efficiency across the labs evaluated. And Wyoming Lab, our state crime lab, was one of 16 entities to receive that award out of 264. And so we're very proud. That's a success that we have achieved in the lab. One thing I would mention, as I mentioned at the start of my presentation, that we have experienced challenges though. And one of the challenges we experienced this year was in the lab. And I know there had been some press about it, so you maybe are aware, but I would just highlight that for you. In November of 2023, our firearms unit failed its annual proficiency test. related to firearms. This unsatisfactory result was discovered in February of 2024 when those results were published. So we immediately began speaking to our accrediting board to determine what corrective action we needed to take. During the initial steps of corrective action, additional problems were found, or additional concerns were found related to the lab, particularly with microscopic examinations. And as a result of those additional concerns, in May of this year, we did suspend the work of our firearms unit in the lab. We contracted with some experts to continue that work, so people sending in firearms work to the lab are still able to get that work done, but it is being done by contract, under a contract that we have with some experts. Part of the corrective action, though, was, of course, to go back and look at the cases that had been analyzed by the firearms unit for 10 years in the past. And we're working on that now. We've been very transparent about this. We have let prosecutors know. We let the defense bar know, both state and federal. We let law enforcement know that we have experienced this problem and that we are having to take corrective action. In July, we sent a letter out to those entities, letting them know, obviously they already knew the problem exists, but letting them know that we're reanalyzing all of the tests from before and asking them to help us prioritize cases that they thought were important to get looked at immediately. Those would be ones in which convictions and prosecutions relied on firearms evidence. And we're working through that now. And I just want to assure you we'll continue to take those corrective actions, both to make sure that we're compliant with the law, but also to determine the root cause of the problem and correct it and make sure that we maintain our accreditation and that we're able to sort those matters out and have our lab return to the work, the good work that it had been doing. And so that is something that we experienced in the lab. The important part, I think, I would want to finally end on related to the lab, that it's important to recognize that this issue is solely contained to the firearms unit. This issue did not affect any of the other parts of the lab. It did not impact biology, toxicology, chemistry, latent prints, or evidence. It is solely contained in the firearms unit, but we are taking the corrective action there. We want to be very careful about that. You know, it is very important that the lab is accredited because it's the only crime lab in the state. It's very important that it's trustworthy, and it's very important that the folks that have relied on the analysis that we have provided in the past are convinced that that analysis was correct. That's in part why we're reanalyzing over 400 cases for 10 years back. So that's what I've got related to the lab, the update related to DCI. With regard to the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy, training's up right next on your agenda, so I will not mention that. The thing that I will mention related to the Law Enforcement Academy relates to the facility itself. As you may or may not know, there's been concerns about the facility and the aging infrastructure that we have at the facility. In 2020, there was a needs assessment done, and the 2020 needs assessment recommended that we build a new law enforcement academy facility. At that time, no funding was approved, and you can imagine why 2020 was a significant reduction in the budget for the state of Wyoming given the pandemic. And so no funding was allocated at that time. And so it was put a little bit on a back burner. In 2022, a second needs assessment was done related to the same issues at the facility. What was recommended after the 2022 needs assessment was that we start looking for land in the Douglas area for a possible new facility, and we have been doing that. I haven't mentioned what some of the concerns of the facility are. Of course, it's too small, it's aging, we've got foundation problems, we've got leaking in the dormitory. Importantly, our firearm ranges are too small. The equipment related to the firearm ranges is antiquated and it's not working very well. The track that we use for emergency vehicle training, operations training is too small, and it's also degrading, and so it's not working very well. So we're looking for land, and the first thing we are looking for land for was to address both the emergency vehicle operations course and firearms training. And so we're in the middle of that process right now, identifying land that could possibly be purchased to address those concerns. We are slated to go before the State Building Commission in October of this year to present the findings and present some of the land that we have found. Now, we're not certain how successful that's going to be. I will note, related to Douglas, the price of property in Douglas is significant. At the same time, so we've got to find something well within a state budget, but also we've got to find somebody willing to sell us property at that rate, because property values in Douglas area are significant. So we don't know, but we are how successful that will be, but we are pursuing those matters right now, trying to get the facility addressed. As mentioned, we'll go in front of the Building Commission in October. In the meantime, we did receive some contingent funding to complete some renovations at the facility itself. That would be the first floor dormitory renovations. That would be to fix water leaking issues there and update some of the dorm rooms. The construction on that project is expected to occur in November or December of this year. So there will be some construction out at the facility. With regard to post, they're also on your agenda. I'll just mention we continue seeing, we saw a significant increase in the amount of complaints against law enforcement officers at post. We've maintained that number for a couple of years that are higher. We had 37 new cases in fiscal year 2024. 57% of those result in revocation, 3.7 in suspension, 2.2 in director's reprimands, and 33% found no further action required, meaning we did not find enough evidence to proceed or that there was a problem there. With regards to victim services, I did want to get through all of our divisions here. With regard to victim services, the thing I would mention there is our Wyoming Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Task Force. I think you're well acquainted with the work of that due to the wonderful work of our director, Chambers there. But that task force, I think, is well known in the nation for the good work they're doing. The thing I would mention about that task force now, the main goal, so the original goal was to understand the problem, get our hands around the problem, and see if there were things that we could do to assist the problem. The main goal now is, of course, better understanding the problem. What can we do related to that? And the main goal of the task force right now is to develop next steps for evolution of the task force into a policy development and a legislative recommendation body, so we can recommend steps that would be helpful to continue to address that problem. Where originally the task force was, let's look at the problem and see if we can identify some of the things that would help that problem. So it's in a little bit of a transition phase, but still doing tremendous work. The last thing I would mention, so as not to take any more of your time, would be our Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. They are right as we speak in their annual conference. That's here in Cheyenne. This is where they bring together all the stakeholders that advocate for folks with developmental disabilities. And the beautiful thing about, I think, this conference is you find that the stakeholders very much want to coordinate so they can address the problem and the challenges presented to folks with developmental disabilities. And it's, I think, a shining example in the state of what you can do when you get all the stakeholders together to work on the problem together, even if they're in different parts of the state, even if they have a slightly different view of how to attack that problem. They're in the middle of that conference right here today in Cheyenne. And that is the agency update I would give you, but I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Well, other than all that, it's been pretty quiet, it sounds like. Yeah, thank you, Madam Attorney General. Very good information. Committee questions for the Attorney General. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General, for being here today and for your updates. I have a question about the failure of the lab for the firearms. Is there been a review of cases that crime lab has been involved in prosecutions? How many cases are we looking at? What's the process moving forward with that?
Sure.
A.G. Hill, go ahead.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Representative Provenza. There is a review. It is ongoing right now. We anticipate re-reviewing over 400 cases. So the time period would be 10 years. We are going back 10 years to look at all of, even though the proficiency exam was only failed for the most recent one, we do think it's important to review all of the past casework. So it'll be over 400 cases. And I can assure you that all will be re-reviewed. What we're doing right now, though, is trying to we've asked folks to help us identify what we would call priority cases. So it is our intent to review those first, and we have started. When we ask folks to help us identify that, we are talking about prosecutors that used firearms in a particular case. The defense bar, we've asked to help us identify cases if they believed that a case that they were counsel for a defendant on. And then, of course, our federal law enforcement partners too, if they saw a case that they believed should be a priority case. And so, yes, we very much are going to review all of those, and it is for a 10-year period. It will be over 400 cases.
Follow-up, go ahead, Representative.
How long do you anticipate that taking in resources? And I imagine it's a heavy lift, so.
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman, Representative Provenza, I don't have a good estimate of that. I do know that some of them, so what I will say is this, some when they are reanalyzed, it's clear very quickly that the outcome of that case was correct. And they're very quick to say that. It's the ones where it's a closer call that take a little bit of time. So I don't have a great estimate for you on the time. We have hired the folks, they are under contract to do all of that work for us. We believe we have enough funding in our 900 series to handle the contract. We don't believe we will need to ask for any more funding related to that.
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General. So mine's along the same lines. So the certification was noticed that the failure happened in January of this year. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, it was actually towards the end of February. So the exam was in November of last year, but the result wasn't made known to us until the end of February of this year.
Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman.
Representative.
So with that, how often do they certify, and why did you go, I mean, I'm assuming they do it every year or every couple of years, and you chose to go back 10 years, which seems to me like it might cast, I mean, that's a long ways back. 400, that's a lot of money that we're spending into this, and if the certification is every year or every 2 years even, it seems like you might go back 1 or 2 cycles. But 10, why did we come up with 400 cases if we've only failed 1, basically for 1 year?
Madam Attorney General, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, it's in working with our accrediting body. So this wasn't a choice just by me. We need to make sure that our crime lab remains accredited. And the standards that they have for making sure we are an accredited crime lab require the 10 years.
Okay, further questions for the Attorney General? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Attorney General. Welcome, and I'm glad you're here. I promised to pick on you a little bit, so now it's my turn. So this committee hears lots of testimony about issues around the state. And frankly, we don't always see those priorities reflected in your budget. We see thousands of fentanyl pills being seized in small-town Wyoming. We see internet crimes against children skyrocketing in the number of tips and leads and so forth. So I just want you to enlighten us a little bit about how you look at your budget and how you consider those priorities, because I think sometimes, at least I personally am very disappointed sometimes that some of those priorities are not more vigorously represented in your budget.
Go ahead, Ms. Hill. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Washit, you know, a lot of factors go into preparing a budget. Some of that is interacting with the rest of the executive branch and the priorities for keeping that budget not escalating, right? From keeping that budget steady and the concept of not growing state government. And so that's an ever-pressing concern on us. Of course, and the dwindling resources in some instances of the state of Wyoming. And so that's an ever-pressing concern for us. Of course, we want to be responsive to all of the concerns in the state of Wyoming related to law enforcement. So it is a balance between increasing a budget and wondering whether we can be responsive to those concerns with the resources that we have now. You are correct that ICAC, so our Internet Crimes Against Children, had seen increased tips during 2020. And the question was, could we handle those increased tips and take action on those tips related to the staff that we have now and in consultation with local law enforcement? And so ICAC was on my radar last year in terms of one. I put together, let me say this, I put together a list of ones that we're pondering at the end, balancing all the concerns that I've noted to you. ICAC's been on the list of whether that was an area where we needed to request additional resources. Our determination at the time for last year's budget session was we could proceed with the staff we have. But know that it is on my mind, so when the next budget session comes up, it will remain on the list of something for me to consider. With regard to fentanyl, we also know that's a big problem in the nation, and of course the state of Wyoming too. And same thing, the question would be, could we tackle the problems we're seeing related to controlled substances with the staff we have now? Meaning the officers that we have now, taking into account, again, all the things that I mentioned related to not increasing the state budget. And so the determination for that was we believed we could. That is one that is always on our list as well. And I will continue to look at it, I could tell you.
Follow up, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. On a slightly different topic, when I look at the Office of Peace Officer Standards and Training, I can't think of another example where we have a director with so few employees and where we have a director responsible for doing day-to-day investigations. Normally, directors are more in a supervisory administrative role. Has there been any consideration about how we might better address that? It's always boggled my mind.
Madam Attorney General, go ahead.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Washit, you know, I was surprised by it as well when I became the Attorney General, because it is a very small unit, and it's been historically a small unit. Over time, we have seen the increase in the cases in front of Peace Officer Standards and Training. I think that you would historically find that one of the main goals of the post unit was to keep track of people, law enforcement officers training. And so historically, there were not as many investigations related to law enforcement officers. So a lot of the staff time originally was making sure everybody maintained their certifications and the trainings and keeping up with the record-keeping aspect of that. We were able to take advantage of technology, right? And what you see in our budget related to peace officer standards and training is very much related to the record keeping. And so we took advantage of technology to use computer systems and various programs that allow the law enforcement officers to keep better track of that training than the paper that we had been using for all of those years. And so some of those resources then were freed up for more of the investigations related to complaints about law enforcement officers. That said, and what I think you would find too, is there was a great focus on law enforcement, 2019, 2020, where you had significant concerns about law enforcement entities. That's when we saw a real increase in the cases there. And that's when we started, to your question, is their budget on my mind? Always. And what we ended up doing was allocating some money for them to hire some folks to help with the investigations. So we have under contract two previous DCI or retired DCI folks to help with investigations, but that is always on my mind. And we're considering same thing. Look, do we need more money to hire it on a contract basis, that work? Because it's not always consistent, right? It ebbs and flows, or would we need to seek more staff? But definitely an area that you're right, is somewhat of an anomaly in terms of the small amount of staff in that unit.
Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would just like to echo the concerns of the co-chairman. We've seen, you said in your testimony that there's been an increase. We haven't increased, it sounds like maybe you've hired contract investigators, but while record keeping might be easier than it was 20 years ago, it's also in some ways more difficult. I've done a request for training records to see what sorts of trainings exist and which officers or which agencies have what, and I've had to hire a data manager to help me parse that apart. It doesn't come out in a clear form. So I think that there's some room for improvement to support our staff, because I very much appreciate Director Walsh and I want him to stay in that position. Sure. And I think it's hard to keep good people in these positions when we ask them to do 10 different jobs and spread them very thin. So I just want to echo what the co-chairman's concerns are.
Opportunity to respond to any of that, Madam Attorney General, go ahead if you want.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I would just say thank you. I mean, obviously, it's always on our mind as well, keeping good people and making sure they're not burnt out or overly busy, but more importantly, that they're able to handle the work that this body has told us is our responsibility. So I will obviously keep that fresh in my mind as we go forward, but we have hired contractors to try to help with that. So we have allocated resources to it. But I hear both of you saying, consider whether we need more staff, and I will do so.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam, thank you for coming. It's definitely an honor and a privilege to have you here. I'm going to change directions just a little bit. Last year we did tour the facility up in Douglas, and we're definitely 100% behind you on making that as good as possible and want to do that. But I want to change directions, and one of the things you mentioned in your presentation is you're kind of a line of defense on our federal level with, I mean, I think reality is the states are the brakes right now for our federal government, and if they were to be able to go down the hill without us, it'd be a pretty dangerous place, especially the western states right now. And so I guess the question that I have, and this is something that's been coming kind of out of my constituency, is it feels a little more like we're reactive, more reactive instead of proactive on some of these issues. And can you kind of speak to the fact where it seems like Wyoming's a bit late coming into the game on some of these lawsuits and not really a forefront runner on those, and just if you could speak to that.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson. I'm going to have a hard time responding because I don't know necessarily what you mean when you say a latecomer. There is a certain amount of time in which you prosecute a lawsuit. So I know, because I read the papers too, that there's been much criticism of my office surrounding the Buffalo RMP and the Rock Springs RMP. But there is a correct time to do that. You have to wait for a final decision, or you get kicked out of court because it's not ripe. So we're sitting here currently ready. We have a retained counsel for the Buffalo RMP, but we have to wait for a final decision from the federal government related to that. And so that is what we're doing. We're prepared to do that. The same would be true of the Rock Springs RMP when you're talking about the litigation surrounding that. You have to have a final decision that you can challenge if you would like me to go to court about that. Now, that said, where I think the important engagement is, and it better positions us for litigation, is engagement on the front end by all the stakeholders. So that would be people commenting when the federal government puts these decisions out, their draft decisions. You need agencies commenting, and they do. Executive branch agencies are very good about that. But you need county folks commenting. You need interested stakeholders commenting. So those comments are part of the record when we go to court and challenge the decision that they made, that we can say we commented on that, and that is of interest to us. Because if you haven't commented on it, your suit is not situated well either. And so I have a hard time saying we're late to the game there. I believe we've chosen the appropriate time. I know when you see a draft decision, it's alarming to us. And so citizens say, do something about that now. Just know that we are preparing to do something about that at the right time, because when it's in a draft state, when it's not final, you can't really, I mean, you could go to court for it, but you would get kicked out for not being a final agency action. And so we're positioning ourselves to ever be ready to take those at the appropriate time, if that's what you refer to.
Okay, quick follow-up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. No, I appreciate it. That was a great explanation. And I think that right there, I wish every person in Wyoming would watch that statement you just made of, hey, this is how you can help. County level, city level, personal level, that farmer or rancher that this affects. Because I think that what we're finding right now is everyone is at a place of going, how can I do something?
Correct.
We see these things that are atrocious. How do we fix them? And how do we back you? How do we back our state? How do we back our local county and state so that we can fix these issues? So no, I appreciate that. I think that did answer in some ways. And I think that really the push of the people is, let's be as proactive as we can. What can we do? Help inform us, help equip us so that we can stop the federal level from running away with this. So
Sure.
I appreciate that and definitely would want to see as much public involvement or maybe knowledge being brought out there for the public so that they can be a part of that process.
Thank you, Representative. I think we all agree with that. And Madam Attorney General, I just wanted to thank you again for being here. I'm going to offer maybe another question or two. We could keep you all morning. We appreciate the information. It's very valuable, and we feel privileged to have you here. So any other questions, committee? Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
More of a comment, Mr. Chairman. We get the department directors from a number of agencies come before the committee, and as you and I discussed before your testimony today, it's the first time in all my time on Judiciary that you have come before the committee, and I just want to make it known that it's always an open invitation. We very much appreciate you being here, because as I see it, as the chief law enforcement officer of the state, some of these issues can greatly benefit from the bully pulpit of the Attorney General.
Sure.
And I encourage you to use that bully pulpit. And I think when I think about things like ICAC, it seems like an easy sell to the legislature, protecting our children from these internet predators. I think you'll find great support among the legislature. So I just encourage you to feel free to use this committee as a forum for discussion of these important issues as we move forward.
Just one final thing. I wanted to thank a couple of your departments. I reached out this past year, and they were incredibly helpful. We had a situation with my brother who was taken advantage of by one of the scams that you hear all about. And it was pretty tragic and pretty awful. And your departments did some work on that front. And we learned a lot more about it. That doesn't mean we can do much about it.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate thing about those. And we found out that it was a company, an LLC from Russia, domiciled in Indonesia, was who had contacted my brother. And I don't mean to out my brother, God bless him, but you know, it's happening to a lot of our constituents. And it's pretty scary stuff, but it was interesting to me and valuable that your folks did some digging and found out that information. It was really quite interesting, but wanted to thank you for that, and thank you again for being here. We want to get to some of your troops this morning and keep moving, so.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me here. I will take into consideration all that you have presented to me and all the ideas you have for me. I will say thank you very much for that, related to being helpful to us. It had been suggested to us from joint appropriations related to the Law Enforcement Academy in particular, that we should come to our home committee to gin up support for that. And at the right time, I think we would, but you're aware of that issue. And so you may see me further. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We would love to see you in November, and we do want to be in a position where we can advocate in the proper space, you know, to our colleagues on appropriations and others. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, let's move on to peace officer training. I see Mr. Walsh, Director Walsh is zoomed in this morning. Mr. Bain, Mr. Curtis, I would encourage Colonel, you guys can all come forward and be up here and ready to go. I'm going to kick the ball first to Director Walsh. And welcome, Director. Hopefully you can hear us. And
I hear you well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I coming across all right?
please continue. Let's get started. Thank you, Director.
First, I'd like to apologize for not being there in person. I have a hearing that's coming up this afternoon, and the geography and drive time just wouldn't allow me to get to both. So I appreciate being able to speak with y'all or answer any questions that you may have. And I know that when we met in June, we've gone over some things. And I think there was one question that I wasn't able to answer for Co-Chairman Washit. Had a question on degrees as far as individuals with certifications go. I was able to get the company that actually makes our personnel software run a special report for us, and I can tell you that about 11% of all of our certified personnel have an associate's degree, 17% have a bachelor's degree, and then it starts to decline from there. There's less than 1% with a doctorate degree, and 2% have master's degrees. So I know that question was lingering, and I guess I would stand for any questions that you may have of me.
Questions of Director Walsh? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, glad to have you with us this morning. I'd just like to get your feedback on the use of contract investigators to handle some of your workload. Is that working out satisfactorily? Is that, in your estimation, a long-term approach that the state ought to utilize rather than growing the number of personnel within your office?
Thank you, Mr.
Director.
Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, the use of the contract investigators has been very helpful. And it's certainly eases some of the load. There may be, just because of the procedural issues that have to come on each case, it may be beneficial to look at at some point in the future a full-time investigator, but with the use of the contractors, it has made day-to-day life a lot easier for me.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Walsh. Just a follow-up question from the good co-chairman regarding contract investigators. I'm just curious if it's more expensive for your office to hire contract investigators, or if it would be more feasible to hire a full-time investigator. And then I'm also curious if there's any screening that's done to detect conflict of interest on who you contract with and the investigation at hand.
Go ahead, Director Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Rodriguez-Williams. So yes, there is a process where we make sure that there's not a conflict of interest. The individuals that have been selected are highly qualified, both retired DCI agents. But of course, if maybe they knew or worked with the individual closely or previous case ties, they wouldn't be assigned to it. And then I would take over that role. And as far as the feasibility of contract work versus a full-time employee. So now, you're talking to a director, and I'm always going to say, yeah, I need more money and I could use more employees. But I think we have a pretty good balance now that there's only certain aspects of an investigation that a contractor can do just because of requirements through the legal system. So, where it says the director shall do this and shall make these notifications, I still have to be involved in each of them. But they do lighten the load on a lot of areas. So in the future, do I think that it would be wise to have an additional investigator, a full-time investigator? Yes, I think it would be a good move to make. And we just have to make that, whenever we increase personnel, you have to make a sound justification when you go before appropriations. So I imagine we will keep talking about that.
Any follow-up, Representative? You good? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, since we're talking about expenses and what it would cost, roughly what do you think would be the FTE for that position if you did get a full-time?
Go ahead, Director.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Oakley, I actually had exactly that number last year. And so when we talk about a full-time employee, we also have to talk about benefits and everything that goes along with a person, not just a salary. And I believe it was in the range of just over 80,000 a year. So I priced it at the salary range of a DCI investigator.
Okay, anything else for Director Walsh at this point? We are undertaking peace officer training, and so we appreciate all of you gentlemen being here this morning to help us understand all we can and do what we can on this front. I don't know who wants to lead off. How about if one of you take it and we'll just go through all three of you. We look forward to hearing from each one of you. So how about Mr. Curtis, Mr. Bain? Which way do we want to go?
Mr. Chairman, we'd be glad to lead off the
Take
discussion.
it away. We're anxious to hear any comments you might have on
Yeah.
where we can go, where we've been, what we might be able to do better.
If you recall, when we appeared before you in June, it was rather short. We had responded to Co-Chairman Washett's email with a lot of questions, and I gave you a lot of printed material for you to review to answer those questions. So I hope that that was beneficial to you to answer those questions. So we kind of just broached the subject of peace officer training. We talked a little bit about course descriptions. There were some comparisons. The Colonel spoke about his program as well and the hours things. And so just coming here this morning to just give you a little brief update of where we are and where we sit related to peace officer basic training, where we're trying to go for 2025, and then simply be here to answer your questions that you might have related to that. So we're a little bit late in the game related to curriculum development and applying that for 2025. That's for a number of reasons, which has been, we've been utilizing that material and the data from the job task analysis, which I briefly talked about in June. That puts us on the same page. Our real challenge is we're trying to serve 95 different law enforcement agencies in the state who all have different needs, different communities, different resources, lack different resources, and trying to pull all those things together and make everybody happy is a very difficult position for us. So we utilize that job task analysis, gathering information from all of those agencies to point us in the direction of what's best for the majority. So sometimes we miss the mark for a particular agency or a group of agencies, but it helps us spend our money wisely, and so we're helping out all of the agencies. So Deputy Director Curtis, as really the manager of curriculum and developer of curriculum for us, has gone to great lengths to look at that, the detail of all of those tasks. What of those things is knowledge? What of those things need to show competence at the academy before they're leaving the academy to go back to the area? And sometimes we're a little bit different from the expectations of the agency of what they believe competence is to what we show competence is. And so it takes us a while to work through that, and that's what we've been doing. Currently, our plan is we will be meeting with the Academy Advisory Board, which is a group of administrators and directors from a lot of different agencies across the state that we created. It was created by a predecessor of mine just to do that, to advise us and help give us information from the field. We'll be meeting with that group on October 9th to give them the proposal of where we think we need to go related to the 2025 curriculum. But let me just share what we're going to be proposing. This is in no way, shape, or form solidified in concrete, if I could put that. But if you recall, in the 2024 curriculum, we were at 605 hours total for the state. Our proposal for the new curriculum is moving to 632 hours. Now, the real challenge of that is how do we do that and yet stay within the current budget that we have and the time frame? One of the greatest constrictors that we deal with is the calendar. How do I put more people into this facility? We've already remarked about the size of the facility, and we keep putting more people in, longer classes. Where does everybody go? We had talked about some of portions of our academy, and the curriculum is done what we call independent learning, where the student is learning, they're doing some things online, they're using computers. It's just a different delivery method than the traditional standard lecture-based format that we know we have some issues and problems with across the board, and that what national research is telling us about the effectiveness of that. We were at 35% of the curriculum. That has dropped to 18.5% would be done in that mechanism. And that's just simply because we have a lot of great data now that shows us how much time they're actually, on average, spending on that material. We found that some of our estimates and things that we allotted that time before was over. They're not taking that much time. So what Deputy Director Curtis has done is reallocated that time to put more into practicals and hands-on training, which is really the direction we want to try to do and put more emphasis on that. So we're looking at an increase of hours. We're trying to keep that still within the same time frame and utilize different methodologies in order to present that material, because once again, it's awful expensive. I did some quick facts and figures yesterday with the help of our Chief Financial Officer at the Attorney General's office. It's costing about $124 a day per student for basic training. So we want to try to make sure that the time that they're there and what we're using is being efficient. So when we were increasing and doing more practicals and wanting to emphasize that, we stole time from other places and other classes and other lectures that didn't need that time period to put towards what we felt was more important and had a priority. So that's still continuing to be our function, because as some agencies can afford or could afford to have an individual, an officer, away from their department for 19 weeks or for 23 weeks, that's pretty tough for a small agency of 3 or 4 people to have that person gone that time period. So we're trying to, again, balance all of those needs and requirements, as well as our funding sources, to provide the best training that we can for all the law enforcement agencies that are out there with the revenues that we have. And that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today, what we're looking at, what some of the 2025 curriculum is going to look like. But we have a long way to go once we get through with our advisory board, and if their recommendations are such, then we'll go before the post commission and present the entire curriculum, the hours and the allocations that we're presenting for their approval. If that's not approved, then we go back to the drawing board and we determine, based on those guidelines and the feedback from the post commission, where we go from there. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director. Questions for the Law Enforcement Academy Director? Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Something that's kind of come onto the radar in the past few years is that I know in my county, we had 3 jail deaths. There's been jail deaths in other parts of the state, and I'm just wondering, in terms of training, has there been consideration into how we're maybe training some of these folks that are working within our detention facilities, and what we can provide to maybe prevent some of that in the future?
ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, much like has been said before, people in my position with the director should oftentimes share and delegate those responsibilities, and this would be one time that I want to turn the microphone over to Deputy Director Curtis, again, who is intimately involved in the curriculum of our training, to answer your question.
Deputy Director Curtis, you want to take a stab at that one for us? Welcome this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Provenza, in custody to death has been a concern for a long time. So there's several different potential reasons why those things may occur. Some of the areas that we already focus on and continue to would be inmate supervision. We have increased both from the standpoint of officers being able to recognize people in mental health crisis, as well as officer mental health, significantly in 2024 for a variety of reasons, plus the amount of practical application that the detention officers get now compared to pre-2020. Those practicals have almost doubled. It's 46-47% increase in practical applications, where they're engaged in things like fight responses, suicide responses, or suicide attempt responses. Those are all some of the things that we are currently doing, not just to bring awareness, but strategies that they could potentially use. The giant caveat to that is, and this is true for patrol officers, peace officers, but probably more so for detention officers, is so much of their job is policy dictated, based on the authority of their jail administrators. So that's not to defer to them, but there is a lot of diversity, even in day-to-day activities, such as a fight response, a high-risk search and uncuff, suicide response, that's dictated by the policy as much as it is by a particular set of skills. So we view our role as providing that information, that knowledge, and some basic skill sets that they can then use within the context of their policies. And in many of those practicals, we will actually allow them to act consistent with their policies. It's very helpful for students from other agencies to see how other agencies do things, and more of a collaborative work. That's what we're currently doing. We don't have new curriculum that we're planning on putting in. Obviously, take anybody's advice on what that should be, and listen to those things. But I think we're fulfilling our role currently.
Further questions for the Academy? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director, probably doesn't surprise you, but since our meeting in June, I've received quite a bit of correspondence with executives around the state. And it struck me that your advisory board doesn't seem to have functioned very well, that there's an awful lot of discontent being expressed about various aspects of peace officer basic, detention basic. And so I just want to urge you to be very responsive at that October meeting, because I think you're well aware that as we go forward with significant budget requests for a new academy facility, it's not going to be helpful if local chiefs and sheriffs are not your biggest cheerleaders. And so I just encourage you to hear them. I'm glad to hear that the independent learning is being diminished. That was probably the number one complaint that I heard over and over again. But also, you know, please seek out opportunities to be efficient in terms of duplicative training for POB, DOB models that we might be able to consolidate, you know, training so we don't have as much redundant stuff going on. And I think about the dispatch training and the time I think we heard at our last meeting that, you know, many of these dispatchers have been working for quite a period of time before they attend dispatch basic. And, you know, I just question how valuable it is if these employees have already been performing for months. You know, what do they really gain from coming to a dispatch training that late into the game as opposed to earlier in their career? So I'm open to any feedback from you, but I just encourage you to be responsive. Thank you.
Gentlemen, appreciate it. Any final comments, and we'll go on to the Colonel. Anything, Director?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. I appreciate your words of wisdom, and we'll certainly take all of that into consideration to make sure we're doing the best product that we can. We too have often looked at that issue related to training for communication officers, and we've done a number of different things in the past history to try to address that, and the bubble always seems to kind of come back to where it is. So your advisement is well taken. Thank you.
A lot of changes in education models over the last few years, that's for sure. Lots of different tacks. So thank you both for being here this morning. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Let's move on to the Colonel. We're appreciative having you here, Colonel. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Tim Cameron, the Colonel of Wyoming Highway Patrol. It's a pleasure to be here. I indeed do enjoy the conversation about training. I would tell you that we seek approval from Post to conduct our own academy, which is done here in Cheyenne at Laramie Community College. That works really well for us because we're single purpose, unlike the WLEA that has a number of law enforcement agencies. It's just patrol troopers, which allows us to do a number of things, and that is, one, instill our values, which is critically important to the culture and the ethics of the agency, and then establish that competency base. Again, it's single focus. We've been running 2 classes a year, much to the chagrin of my training, safety and training staff. And if we could work the schedule out with LCCC, I would run 3 a year. We've had large classes, typically about 20, which is different. The class we have right now is 10 basic students and 10 laterals, actually 9 laterals. 1 went over to the basic class. So in our academy, anywhere from 900 to 1,000 hours in our curriculum. If you're an entrance level or a basic academy student, you do the full academy. If you're a lateral, or pre-cert as we call them here in Wyoming, you do, originally it was 4 weeks. And because of the feedback we got both from the student interviews and staff interviews, the request was the same to increase it, so it's now 6 weeks. So our B squad is already out in field training now. So that has helped us immeasurably with what was a huge vacancy rate when I got here in Wyoming in 2023, we had a significant percentage of vacancies. Today, I'm very pleased to say, and I don't take any credit for this, it's the men and women of the Highway Patrol that have worked very hard to recruit and make some changes. We're at 28 vacancies today, with one trooper in process of coming back. And that's what we've seen over the past month. So we're just about a 13% vacancy rate, unlike the 37 point something we had before. And again, that is because of our best, we have a recruiter, which was one of the advancements we made, but the entire agency, troopers, our dispatchers, our ports, we've all seen increases to those numbers. So again, appreciate the approval for post, where we conduct our own academy, not just for troopers, but also for our dispatchers. We do that in-house as well, and our port employees. I would tell you that our curriculum, again, because we're single focused on our troopers, based on their job task analysis, and what we see in our community, and what we see changing around us all the time. And I think you made the comment about, has our training kept pace? And I feel like in our profession, policy has changed and our training has not changed at the same requisite rate. I feel a little differently about the patrol because we train to the policy, and our policy reflects current best practice, if that makes sense. We were able to institute some new curriculum in this past class, and then instituted agency-wide. Was very important to me. It's ICAT, Integrating Communications, Assessment and Training. The important term in there is integrating, because that means we're touching on these topics throughout the experience in the academy. You know, our officers that attend the academy, that's the foundational context that they have for their entire career. So we have to ensure that we build a sturdy foundation of knowledge and understanding of the focus on decision-making, communications, and critical skills that modern-day police officers need. We're able to impart that. So again, I appreciate the approval of posts that we have to conduct that class. And I think otherwise we would overwhelm WLEA. Like WLEA, we are restrained to a degree by some of the resources that we have, namely physical locations. We're in definite need of a driving track. Probably one of the most significant exposures to liability that we have, because our personnel driving at speed and conducting TVIs, which is always a concern. So, sir, that's it in a nutshell, but I'm glad to answer any questions or address anything.
Colonel, thank you. Appreciate that very much. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on that driving track, it sounds like both WLEA and the academy could benefit from new driving facility. And I looked online at some of the phenomenal driving facilities that some law enforcement agencies and academies around the country have available to them. I can't imagine what those cost. So the chances of the state of Wyoming building 2 of those facilities, I think, is 0, right? So whether we build that track in Douglas or someplace in between Cheyenne and Douglas, or, you know, but I think that there's got to be some thought put into this about, you know, do we build it at Camp Guernsey? Where do we build this driving track facility? Because it's going to be expensive, and we want it to be available for, you know, both troopers and law enforcement officers from other agencies around the state. So any comment about the need, you know, because I know you'd both like to have it right outside your back door, but to both of you, you know, from a fiscal standpoint, how do we meet the needs? Because I don't like the idea that troopers are learning to drive at speed on the public highways where the borrow pit is only 10 feet off to your side, right? And that we have motoring public out there alongside. So comments on the driving track for both of you, please.
Yeah, do you want to take that first, Colonel?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Representative Washit, I wouldn't ask you to build 2 tracks. I would ask you to invest in one that's a best practice, cutting edge kind of facility. You know, not just the patrol troopers, but every peace officer in Wyoming is part of a mobile field force. That's how we conduct our work, their offices or their vehicles. So it would make sense that we would expose them to as much as we could in training before we put that into practice. And, you know, we drive from Cheyenne to Camp Guernsey to do our EVOC and our TVI training. But it's absolutely a necessity. So I know that that's a significant investment for the state, but I think it is appropriate that we give that level of training to all of our peace officers. And no matter where the track is, you know, it's going to require management and upkeep. And so I would defer to you for the best place to put that track. Certainly, it would require a tract of land. So thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner
So
Washington.
let's go to our Academy Director. Any thoughts, Director? I'm sure you share those, probably.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, yes, it certainly makes sense to pool the resources and provide those. We have a little bit of history of doing that and other agencies utilizing our current facility. Highway Patrol has a number of years ago utilized that. One of the thoughts and the logic behind some of the academy training has been, rather than a dozen law enforcement agencies having to buy cars and outfit those in the equipment and maintenance of those things, is to have it all in one place and everybody be able to use that. So we have some history of people utilizing the current facility that we have. Some of the things you have to think about is what vehicles are used, how are those vehicles kept, who's going to be maintaining that. You know, if it's at a convenient location for both agencies, then we have to think about the maintenance. We have to think about when there's 3 feet of snow out there, who's plowing that at 3 o'clock in the morning before you have training taking place. But we are all for working together with Highway Patrol and other agencies to see what we can do to make that happen. Now, I will just say on the footnote of that as the Attorney General talked with you about and exploring some of the property that we were looking at, it's sizable enough of what we were looking at that we had that in mind to be able to put that kind of training facility there. I just put that out there for your information. Thank you.
Any final questions for, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, I went to the fallen firefighters memorial a few weeks back and talked to several of our volunteer fire chiefs around the state. We have a real issue in this state in terms of attracting and recruiting younger firefighters, EMS issues. And I just like to encourage the three of you to think about that the day is coming where law enforcement may be the first and only emergency medical provider for substantial periods of time while you await for EMS to arrive. And so I would just ask you to really think about making the EMS basic emergency care training components in your curriculum much more robust. And if there's a need for, you know, basic emergency care equipment to put in cars and those sorts of things, I just encourage you to bring those budget requests forward, because I think you may be the first and only in many respects. So, thank you.
Appreciate having one of our experts right here on our panel with us. So, Co-Chairman, good thoughts, and I appreciate all of you being diligent and responsive to really what I see as a changing environment. We see it on the news every day, and all of us are concerned about our peace officers out across, and we appreciate them and just want them to be as prepared as we can get them there. So thank you all for being here. I want to give Mr. Thompson a chance to come forward with our sheriffs and chiefs on this peace officer training issue.
Mr. Chairman?
And Mr. Bigelow is here, I think.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Haroldson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, halfway between Cheyenne and Douglas is Wheatland, and I'll help test that track.
We'll take that under advisement, Representative. Thank you for that. Yeah. We were thinking Chugwater probably, but I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Still in your district.
Mr. Thompson, good morning. Welcome.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. I was having microphone problems there. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of WASCOP, which is the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and to listen to the previous testimony this morning. And I don't really have much to add other than to echo the sentiments that our Academy staff had mentioned this morning about the upcoming meeting with the advisory board, and also to add that our board and our committee working on addressing any of these training goals going into the future are tentatively set for a meeting in October, early October, with the Academy to have a face-to-face meeting and address these same issues that were discussed this morning. I'd like to also commend the Academy for the previous work they've already done to diminish that 35% of online training, and then also to add meaningful content in there in our early discussions with the director at the Academy. You know, some of those things from their job tax analysis, which is completed by our administrators from across the state. So it would appear that they're taking a serious look at the needs of the agencies, spanning those one-man agencies up to our 100-plus person agencies. We're very hopeful, and we're excited for those discussions coming forward. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, any questions for the sheriff and chiefs? Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I see where, is there a Mr. Bigelow? Yeah, please come forward. Yeah, good morning. Please introduce yourself and sorry, I didn't see you back there. Yeah.
It is, perfect. Sorry, this is my
There we
first time.
go.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jake Bigelow. I'm a sergeant with the Casper Police Department. Very much thank you for allowing me to address an issue that's pretty near and dear to my heart. And it has been something that affects the professionalism of law enforcement across the state of Wyoming and the protection of our citizens. The lack of adequate training for Wyoming peace officers on search and seizure and Fourth Amendment issues across the state has reared its ugly head, most recently with some very public lawsuits that have happened across the state. Just of note, my department is aware that I'm here. They are aware that I'm testifying. However, I'm not here on behalf of the Casper Police Department, nor the city of Casper, nor any other organization in the state of Wyoming. I'm here on my own, so my comments are that of my own. I've been a police officer in the state of Wyoming for approximately 12 years. Prior to that, I spent 6 years as a military police officer, and I also serve as a legal instructor for a national training company called Blue to Gold, specializing in search and seizure training across the nation, particularly in Fourth Amendment issues. In my role at the Casper Police Department, in addition to being a patrol sergeant, I am responsible for all of the search and seizure training within my agency, as well as local agencies around our jurisdiction and around the state. And I also frequently work with our administration on policy development and internal affairs investigations pertaining Fourth Amendment issues. I do provide training across the state of Wyoming through my work with Blue to Gold, as well as around the country. And I've had the honor and luxury of teaching thousands of people across states like Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Kansas, Washington, Nebraska. And search and seizure is something that I'm very, very passionate about. I believe it's the literal playbook for how we as police officers do our jobs. And if you can't understand or know the rules, you can't play the game. That's how that works. So I'd like to just, a little scenario that I think is all too common across the state. Officers respond to a house to locate a suspect who has committed a robbery and an aggravated assault. They do not have a warrant for his arrest. They do not have a search warrant to go into the house and get him. The individual answers the door, but stays within the threshold of the house, stays inside the residence. The officers instruct the individual that he's under arrest. He refuses to come out of the home, and instead he shuts the door in the officer's face. The officers reach inside instinctively to prevent the door from shutting and take him into custody. Is that a lawful action? And the answer is no, it is not lawful. That action violates the Fourth Amendment. It likely results in a lawsuit. If the suspect resisted and the officers were injured or there was an interference charge, it would likely be dismissed because they're not acting in the lawful authority of their duties. And unfortunately, scenarios like this are happening across the state of Wyoming and the United States regularly, and they are resulting in lawsuits. They are resulting in officers being injured, and in some cases, large settlements, most recently $127,000 that I'm aware of. These issues are also resulting in officers losing their jobs and cases being dismissed. In my work traveling across Wyoming teaching search and seizure, I routinely encounter officers with 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 years of experience who proudly discuss their advanced training in areas like in areas like investigations, interview techniques, firearms, custody and control. But when I ask them how much search and seizure training have they received over their 20-year period, many of them say none. They got their minimal training at the academy, their foundational knowledge, and then they spent 20 years as a police officer never having been forced to attend an additional hour of search and seizure training. That's extremely concerning to me. These officers are taking action that implicates citizens' Fourth Amendment rights every single day in almost every single interaction they have with our community. Yet many of these officers have received no ongoing education and are not up to date with current legal standards. This lack of training is having severe consequences. Officers and departments across the state are being sued routinely for Fourth Amendment violations. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in settlements are being paid out, the loss of jobs, and in one instance, an officer being shot and almost killed. These violations aren't happening because officers are rogue or malicious. They're happening because officers are not being given the knowledge and tools that they need to consistently make constitutionally sound decisions. These are also resulting in cases not being prosecuted, and they're resulting in loss suppression hearings where county attorneys and district attorneys can't prosecute cases even if they wanted to. One of the issues, and again, this is a multifaceted issue, and I don't pretend to understand all of it, but one of the issues that I see traveling around the state of Wyoming and talking to hundreds of police officers, to include administrators, is a lack of Fourth Amendment training or inconsistent training at the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy. The curriculum was, and I understand through testimony today, that's being reduced, online-based. A lot of the Fourth Amendment curriculum, the didactic curriculum, was online-based, with practical application left at the scenario-based level. One of the issues that I hear routinely and the feedback that I get from officers and administrators across the state is that those issues, how those Fourth Amendment issues are taught, they're often left up to conflicting opinions by instructors with different experience. I received feedback from officers indicating that in some cases the instructors may have been wrong in their interpretation of what they were teaching, and it left officers confused or underprepared when they left the academy. This is not an attack on the academy at all. I know many of the academy instructors. I believe the director, the deputy director, and all of the instructors there have a passion for teaching law enforcement and want the best for our state. But I do think there are some deficiencies that it sounds like through testimony today are being addressed. To compound the issue, some state legislations I'm even aware of some previous attempts in Wyoming to hold officers criminally liable for their actions or stripping them of qualified immunity without recognizing that many of these officers are acting in what they genuinely believe to be a lawful manner due to their lack of training. You cannot hold someone criminally accountable when they had no idea that they were breaking the law. The proper solution is not to punish these officers, but to provide them with the training that they need to make sound and informed decisions. Only after we've equipped officers with correct understanding of the law can we hold them justly and criminally accountable. Moreover, we should not seek to revoke an officer's certification for unlawful actions when those actions were taken without intent or malice. I heard today that we have an increase in officer complaints that are resulting in revoked certifications. I question how many of those are Fourth Amendment issues and how many of those officers had no idea they did anything wrong until after the fact. It's a failure to provide training at all levels, at the agency level, at the state level. Punishing officers in the case is not the answer. The fundamental problem is the lack of funding for ongoing training or the mandatory requirement for ongoing training with Fourth Amendment issues. Many departments can barely afford the necessary equipment, let alone comprehensive legal education for their officers. This is where the state must step in. I believe a few steps need to be taken, and I don't believe this is an all-encompassing or comprehensive list. We need to evaluate the academy curriculum as it pertains to Fourth Amendment principles. I heard this morning that that's happening, and I'm ecstatic to hear that. I believe that it needs to not just be a basic understanding of Fourth Amendment principles, but it needs to be a extensive amount of training associated with Fourth Amendment principles. I believe that if there are conflicting lessons being taught or conflicting interpretations by instructors, that needs to be addressed. And I believe that online Fourth Amendment didactic curriculum for Fourth Amendment issues needs to be completely eradicated. That should be an in-person, vetted training process with practical application. It should not be taught, you should not be relying on officers to follow an online curriculum when it pertains to something so important as Fourth Amendment. I am aware there are some state funding methods in place for education. I believe that needs to be expanded upon. I believe officers need to have training focused specifically on search and seizure and Fourth Amendment issues. It must be accessible to all departments at no cost. And we need to ensure that even smaller, underfunded agencies have the ability to their officers to participate. These agencies can barely afford to buy equipment. They cannot send officers to other states or to even to Cheyenne for 3 nights. They can barely afford the hotel cost. We should consider some options. Currently, the state has vague mandates, and I believe this is one of the leading problems. The vague mandates associated with peace officers regarding continuing education and perishable skills. There is a 10-hour mandatory perishable skill requirement to maintain your certification in Wyoming. And they're required to complete that 10 hours. However, those 10 hours can be anything from firearms, custody and control, or search and seizure. However, search and seizure is not a mandatory requirement under the current guidelines, and as a result, officers often do not prioritize or select this area to fulfill their training requirements. It is not only possible, but extremely likely that an officer will spend their entire career in Wyoming having never taken a single continuing education hour on Fourth Amendment topics. To address this gap and reinforce the importance of constitutional policing, the state should ensure that search and seizure training becomes a mandatory part of continuing education for all officers to retain their certification, equip them with the critical knowledge necessary to uphold citizens' constitutional rights. And I do not believe this should be at the legislative level. I believe this should be at the administrative level within post to set those hours. I believe that subsidized regional training programs must take place. The state should offer regionally available training sessions funded by the state to make ongoing training and legal education accessible to all officers without placing the financial burden on already strained police department budgets. Officers are being failed by this lack of training, and the citizens of Wyoming are paying the price. Lawsuits, job losses, and even life-threatening incidents are occurring because we are not giving our officers the education they need to perform their duties within the boundaries of the law. Departments without sufficient budgets cannot be expected to fund this training on their own. We must provide necessary resources to train our officers appropriately and protect both the public from consequences and avoid legal mistakes. The time to act is now. Wyoming officers are ready to serve their communities with professionalism and integrity, but they need your help. Let's give them the training they need to protect our citizens and uphold the Constitution. I sit here willing and able to assist you or anyone you designate to assist in this matter. I would not only be happy but ecstatic to participate in curriculum design, continuing education requirements, planning, organization of regional training opportunities, training and education in any other area might be of use. Thank you for your time. I strongly urge you to address the critical issue for the benefit of law enforcement of the people of Wyoming, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have of me.
I'll be darned, probably in here. We do appreciate it. Thank you for your passion. And I would absolutely encourage you to continue a dialogue with the Academy. You heard some of the questions we asked and some of the encouragements we gave to the Academy. Hopefully this is the beginning of a better dialogue going forward. So I would encourage you. Any questions? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. Just one of the things you said was that you think that this should all be done through post, and part of the perishables, the 10-hour requirement, is in state statute. And I've seen what folks use for the perishables, and they often use the firearms training with that, which, you know, fits under that. And there's other things they could use, like de-escalation, various other things. Some of my concern, and I share the same concerns you have about Fourth Amendment protection and making sure that they follow the Constitution, protects law enforcement and so forth. But if we don't have something that essentially mandates, then I think the concern falls on leadership within agency, right? Because the agency head determines what training their officers are going to get for those perishable items for that 10 hours. Do you not think then, if part of the issue might be legislation, how do you see this trickling down to, say, your sheriff's office or your chief of police, if there isn't a mandate in place that post can't necessarily provide?
Officer Bigelow, thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, it's a great question. On the hot seat here for that. I don't want to inadvertently make a statement on policy that I don't think I'm prepared or experienced to make, because I'm not an administrator. Personally speaking, I share your sentiment. I believe that the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy does an excellent job of providing firearms instructors across the state of Wyoming. I believe that it does an outstanding job of providing custody and control instructors across the state of Wyoming. Therefore, almost every department in the state of Wyoming has a firearms instructor. It has a custody and control instructor. But there are no search and seizure instructors across the state of Wyoming that I'm aware of, and I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm not aware of any certifying process that the academy would certify somebody as a search and seizure instructor, for example. Therefore, I think these agencies don't even have access to search and seizure training. So it is substantially cheaper for an agency to utilize firearms as a perishable skill because they already have an instructor. I believe that is a failure in that whether it's through legislative change or administrative change at the post level, I believe that Fourth Amendment issues need to be mandatorily required as part of continuing education and not under that 10 hours. I think formerly as a paramedic, when I recertified my paramedic, I had to meet a certain number of hours on pediatric emergencies, on airways, so it was broken down. I think we would benefit from something like that. So whether it's through legislative change or an administrative change at the post level, I think taking away the option for administrators to choose what their officers train on and making it mandatorily required at some level above them would be necessary. Does that answer your question, Representative Provenza?
Okay, thank you, Officer. Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Mr. Bigelow, thanks for being here. Interesting assessment and a very important topic. I would kind of like to hear maybe from the director or Mr. Curtis, if they could just respond back to it just very briefly. Because it is a serious accusation and it seems like it could be a serious problem across state. I'm just curious how they view this problem.
So, Officer, if you'd stand by for just a minute. I don't know if Director Walsh is still online with us, still streaming in. Director, did you hear that question from Representative Jennings? And would you like to weigh in on what if we were to look at Fourth Amendment concerns raised by Officer Bigelow this morning and wanted to look at statute, or what's your reaction to the conversation here on the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the Fourth Amendment concerns and training is critical training, and it is probably a foundational element of most law enforcement contacts that are out there. So I do agree with having it. And currently we have it required as a perishable, or it is included in a perishable skill set that is part of required training. And again, just like Mr. Bigelow said, you get to pick from a series of fields or areas in perishable skills to meet the 10-hour requirement, each certification level, at a professional level anyway. And I would think that a good way to address that, if we wanted to take a look at it, would be, so we have state statute, and then we also have it addressed in post rule. And I think post rule might be a better location for that type of requirement.
So Director, just to follow up on that, it sounds to me like that's something that the committee would like to have you look at. I respect that you think maybe rules is the way to go. We can certainly come in over the top of rules with a statutory change, but my sense is it would probably be better in rule as well. If you'd be willing to take a look at that and then maybe report back to us in November as to what you think a modification might be if we wanted to emphasize what we talked about this morning, that might be the way to go. Committee, any thoughts? Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bigelow, in regards to your company, Blue and Gold, what you're saying, do you have like any sort of reports or any sort of data to provide post, specifically if we're going to do this through rulemaking process, that shows maybe the number of people that you've trained or law enforcement officers that you've trained across the state, maybe some pre and post survey data of the benefits of your training and so forth, just to show the need, I guess is where I'm getting at for this training?
Officer, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, thank you for the question. Just to clarify, I want to make sure it's not my company. When you said my company, I don't want to imply that it's my company. And I'm not here as an endorsement of the company that I teach for, so I don't want that to be confused. I'm here as an advocate for the state of Wyoming and an officer in the state of Wyoming. Yes, I can speak to the feedback that I got. I just received a phone call from the Torrington police chief. I taught his agency through that company several months ago, and the phone call I got from him said that he believed his department was operating better with more confidence and navigating Fourth Amendment issues substantially better than he had ever seen before. So I do have some statements like that. As far as the number of officers instructed in Wyoming or around, I do have records of that. I have several classes scheduled through Wyoming through the remainder of this year, both in Thermopolis and Jackson Hole. So I will be out there. I do seek feedback from every class that I teach and do get those reviews. And then I follow up with agencies, and frequently I find I'm getting emails from officers afterwards. I know there's not much weight on those things. That's not analytical data necessarily, but I know I'm making a difference simply by the feedback that I'm getting. To provide specific numbers, I absolutely could provide adequate and specific numbers for you.
Officer, thank you. And we do appreciate the work you're doing. I would encourage you to interact with Director Walsh, and I'd be interested to see if there's any modifications that the two of you might be able to come to or recommend. I think you've piqued the interest of the panel for sure this morning, and we're interested. Further questions? And then we need to move on, committee. Officer, thank you. Appreciate you being here this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Okay, that brings us to the end of Peace Officer Training Issues Committee. We're going to move on to another topic unless there is desires for any motions or.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think there may be public comment on this topic. I'm not sure if you want to handle the public comment with each topic or.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Brian. Do we have anyone here in the? Okay, please come forward. Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for that reminder. Thought Mr. Bigelow might be the only one.
Well, this isn't nerve-wracking at all. I'm going to read from this, so bear with me. Good morning. My name is Desiree Tinoco. I'm the founder and executive director of the nonprofit Missing People of Wyoming. I'll tell you a bit about myself and how I got into this line of work, and then explain some of the concerns I feel should be addressed. I started the Missing People of Wyoming Facebook group just over 5 years ago. There are now nearly 35,000 members. Anyone is welcome to join and submit missing persons flyers, all of which are verified with authorities. As the group has grown, so has my role within it. I've worked closely with agencies across Wyoming and other states. A few years ago, I recommended DCI provide a public database for missing persons. At the time, Wyoming was one of a few states without this in place. I'm pleased that this has been a great resource for myself and others in order to verify cases. As mentioned throughout this process, I've come across issues. Wyoming is one of a handful of states without a protocol for missing adults. Federally, there are protocols for missing juveniles. However, they leave it up to each individual state on how to address missing adult cases. At this time, agencies throughout the state have their own protocols that they choose to use, if at all. This creates a huge liability concern for these agencies. Uninformed law enforcement can sometimes create issues without these protocols in place. Also, loved ones of those that are missing are not getting the important information during this process. I would assume I probably work on 2 cases a month that are handled incorrectly. Either the person was not reported missing to the NCIC database that law enforcement uses, or they were taken off the database without physically being seen by law enforcement. This creates a multitude of issues for the loved ones of those that are missing as well, becoming their own advocates and attempting to verify any tips. They're not trained for this sort of work, and it can create inconsistencies. There's also the concern for scammers. It's sad to think in such a tragic time that someone would be trying to take advantage, but it does happen and often. If an agency refuses to file a missing persons report, a phone number cannot be provided, at which point loved ones turn to using their own phone numbers out of desperation, and scammers will contact them, attempting to con them in any way possible. If loved ones of the missing are fortunate enough to find the group, I will walk them through the process in order to get their loved one reported missing. However, this is not the work I set out to do, nor should we be relying so heavily on a nonprofit for consistency. Recently, a study was conducted by the Wyoming Survey and Analysis Center. You can find the study on their website. A summarized version is available on the Wyoming Victim Services website. I have a physical copy here too, if you'd like. The study does an impeccable job at highlighting the difficulties that Wyoming faces regarding missing adults. At this time, 40 states and DC have passed laws that require agencies to report adults missing to a federal and state database. According to NamUs, Wyoming is ranked 12th per capita for missing persons. That's 9.26 out of 100,000 people. I believe with protocols in place, that number should slightly increase. Given that we are one of the last states without a protocol, we can see what has worked for others in our region. I believe it would be beneficial to ask agencies throughout the state, including smaller and larger agencies, DCI and YSOP, for their insight as to how this would affect their work. The protocols that South Dakota and Montana and other states surrounding us that have been put in place should be looked into as well. Given their close proximity, it would make it easier for missing persons cases throughout our region if we're all using the same protocols. At the bottom of the report done by Wyoming Statistics and Analysis, there's a link for all the states and what their protocols entail. If you have any questions, I would love to answer them.
Can you do me a favor and tell us your name again?
Desiree Tinoco, Tinoco, DESIREE.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you
for
so
the
much.
information. Appreciate it. Further public testimony. Anyone in the room want to testify on peace officer training issues? Anyone online? Anyone streaming in who wants to testify? Okay, I'm going to close public testimony and committee. We're going to move into fingerprints and background checks. Before we do that, we're going to take 10 minutes and then we'll come back and take that up. Are we online? Are we all set? Okay, let's get back underway. Next item on our agenda, fingerprints and background checks information that we touched on in our previous meeting, and I'd like to welcome several individuals on this front. But ladies, thanks for being ready to go. Please introduce yourself. Let's get started, and we look forward to it.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Rachel Campbell, and I'm a Policy and Planning Supervisor with the Department of Family Services, and I supervise our background check unit within the department.
Good morning, Chairman, Co-Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Allison Moore. I'm one of the Deputy Directors of the Division of Criminal Investigation. When we last met in June, you had asked me to come prepared to give a brief update on crime reporting. I don't know if you want me to touch on that now or not, or just move into background checks.
I think it'd be terrific if you touch on that information first and then move in. That would be great.
Okay. You should have received in your packets a list of current law enforcement agencies in Wyoming who are reporting and are not reporting crime statistics, or what we call NIBRS data. On that list, the agencies that are highlighted in blue are the agencies that are reporting. The 3 agencies that are bolded on that list are the update since we last met in June. Also, since June, our lone employee within our uniform crime reporting section has been providing training. She provided a training in July in Afton and in August in Rock Springs. Total, she trained 22 individuals representing 6 agencies. DCI will continue to offer trainings as well as continue to reach out to those agencies that are in green on that list that are not currently reporting to provide assistance. It's our understanding many of these agencies continue to struggle with their case management vendors, who their RMS or their NIBRS data is pushed through, as well as with staffing shortages. In July, I met with my counterparts from other states, and they're consistently seeing the same struggles in their areas. As you may recall from my previous testimony, Wyoming takes crime statistic data from NIBRS and compiles the Crime in Wyoming report. We then push that data to the FBI. The FBI compiles the Crime in the US report. It's our understanding partners of the FBI have been reaching out to various states and conducting some surveys to determine if issues that they're seeing are with the same vendors. This gives me hope that we will continue to see improvements with the RMS vendors that our agencies in Wyoming are using. With that, do you have any questions on background or on NIBRS data, or do you want me to move into background checks?
Questions for the Deputy Director? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Director, any sense of how much impact the missing data has on overall Wyoming crime statistics? I think I saw something recently where the director was cautioning about crime data, being able to utilize that data. So how big of an impact is the missing data in your estimation?
Ms. Moore, go ahead.
Chairman, Co-Chairman, I've not looked at statistically the populations that are covered by the agencies that aren't reporting. I feel like that's really what statisticians would say, how that would impact our crime statistics. I can say when we report in the Crime in Wyoming report, we just report the straight numbers, exactly what was reported to us. The FBI, if you go to their website, when they report crime statistics for Wyoming, they use estimates, and they use their formulas that are based on agencies that are reporting and what the population is in Wyoming. So they attempt to estimate what that looks like for these non-reporting agencies. A lot of the agencies that aren't reporting are smaller agencies, although we do have a couple of large agencies. Those agencies likely do not have as many NIBRS reportable offenses. Where we have to use caution is that the NIBRS data that we're looking at now, it's hard to compare that to previous years because we're using NIBRS where we previously used to use summary data, which wasn't as robust. So now we have the more information, right? Previously, crime data was reported on a hierarchy, so you reported the most serious offense within an event. And so if there were multiple crimes that were committed, only the most serious was being reported. Now we're collecting all of that information. So it may look like crime has gone up when in fact it may not have. We're not sure. It's going to take a number of years to have a good baseline.
So I've got a question, and I think you partially answered it, at least. So we have a couple of bookend communities in our state that aren't reporting, and I'm just curious, what's the reasoning? Why would two of our bigger towns not be reporting on this list that you provided us?
Right. Chairman, it's my understanding, most of them, it's those two reasons. Either issues with their RMS system. Agencies pay a lot of money for these record management systems. Pushing data to NIBRs, especially for a large agency, would be extremely time-consuming if they were going to try to manually do that instead of using their RMS system. Those RMS systems should have the features built in that they can just push that data. Unfortunately, that's not always working. And then also the staff levels. There are several agencies that we've done repeat trainings for staff from those agencies, and I think it's due to turnover. You know, they get someone in, we provide the training, they start to look at, okay, how do we get on board to start reporting NIBRS data, and then that person leaves. That agency then has to send someone else in to do the training.
So it's really not an issue of contracting the labor to get in and get a department up to speed, for example. It's more of boots on the ground and the ability to report that data in the first place, right?
Yes, Chairman, that's my understanding.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's move on to other testimony. Anything else that you have to share with us this morning?
Yes, on background checks,
Okay.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay, we were given 2 new positions this biennium, in large part to help with our backlog on our fingerprint-based background checks. We have filled one of those positions so far. That employee started on August 16th. We made a job offer for the second position. Unfortunately, that person declined, and we anticipate conducting interviews soon for that second position. The one person we were able to hire in conjunction with staff within our Criminal Justice Information Services Unit pitching in has allowed us to reduce our turnaround time. And currently, we're turning around record checks 7 to 10 business days, and that's from the day we receive the fingerprint card until the day the results go out. While this is an improvement, we recognize this is still a long time for many licensing boards as well as hiring decisions to be made. Several months ago, we purchased a batch scanner that is specifically used for fingerprint cards. This batch scanner will allow us to scan multiple cards at one time versus individually scanning cards one at a time on flatbed scanners. We've purchased the scanner. The vendor who provides the scanner has to install the appropriate software and configurations specific to our system and how it's set up. They've been working on that, and they anticipate installing that scanner in the coming weeks. Myself, as well as the supervisor over the background check section, have met with other states to find out what solutions they've implemented to also drastically increase their turnaround times. We, along with DCI Director Jones, have also been meeting with ETS's Project Management Office, and we're currently in the discovery stage working with individuals within PMO to release an RFI, or request for information. This will allow us to determine if there are other solutions out there that could help us streamline the process and continue to provide improvements to our turnaround times. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
So regarding the offer of that second position, is just not much response in terms of an application pool, or is it more of a qualification issue?
Chairman, I believe it's more of a qualification, and then part of it has just been the timing. The job offer that we made, we had gone through the background process, which is a lengthy process with DCI. In addition to fingerprinting, we do a little bit more in-depth background check. And so we had gone through all of that and closed out the previous posting that we had when that applicant decided that she no longer wanted to pursue employment with DCI. So it kind of put us at starting back over, but we do have a good selection of candidates right now.
Okay, good, thank you. Questions? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Moore, I'm just wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit on what you learned from some of the other states that you looked at. What are they doing that might be different or that might be helpful for us? Thank you.
Go ahead, Deputy Director. Sorry, caught me in mid-Starbucks.
Chairman, Senator Schuler. What we found is that a lot of the solutions that other states use, unfortunately, aren't an option for Wyoming at this time due to the rural nature of Wyoming. An example I would give is that many of those states contract with a vendor who provides the fingerprinting services throughout the state. And those states will have fingerprinting stations set up within an hour of every constituent or every citizen of that state. The individual goes in to that facility. It may be a live scan that's set up in, say, a FedEx or a UPS office. They get fingerprinted, they make their payment there, and then those fingerprints come in digitally to those state agencies. We don't have that as an option right now. I don't know any vendors that are going to want to stand up a very expensive live scan machine and have employment for that in some of our more rural areas where we don't have as many fingerprinting needs. So it is things that we're looking at. What can we do? What changes can we make? Currently, we rely heavily on law enforcement to help provide those fingerprints for us. And then there are agencies such as DFS, school districts, that will also do fingerprinting on their own. It would be very difficult for DCI to allow all the agencies to electronically connect to DCI. This is something we're working on with ETS on what would this look like? Are there any solutions there? And it has to do with our infrastructure and making sure that we have the appropriate edge devices and securities in place to keep our systems secure.
Further questions? Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that's really good that you've already lowered the turnaround time. So when the batch scanner comes on, what do you anticipate that lowering the turnaround time to?
Is that going to help, Deputy?
Chairman, Representative Jennings. We hope it will. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like yet. I know that right now, individuals, the cards come in individually, and they have to scan them one at a time. Now we'll be able to put a stack of cards into the scanner at once and scan them, which will allow our fingerprint examiners less time on that manual scanning. It's a much quicker scanning process, but we've not estimated what the turnaround time will improve. I believe the addition of the second position is going to also help us with the improvement.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So I spoke to a young man recently who had his fingerprints run through the Professional Standard Teachers Board and then applied for a substitute teacher's job in a school district and had to do it again within days of each other. And I'm just wondering how much redundancy is out there and how much is that log jamming the process, that if the Professional Standard Teachers Board has already conducted a background check for a substitute teacher, why would the local district have to do it again? It just seems like that's part of the problem.
Go ahead, Deputy.
Chairman, Co-Chairman. The reason that the fingerprints have to be done separately has to do with FBI requirements. When we're running background checks on educators, we're doing a federal background check. So we're checking the FBI's records, which is how we collect information from every state. The FBI has a requirement that you can only use the fingerprint background check for the purposes that it was initially required. So Professional Teaching Standards Board is for the licensing of that educator. The school district is for the hiring. So it's two separate purposes. They're also not allowed to share that criminal history. Once we provide the criminal history to Professional Teaching Standards Board, they're not allowed per FBI regulations to in turn share that information with the school district. That's where we end up with some of the redundancy when there's licensing as well as hiring involved.
As an example, the federal government helping us again.
Now we know. Thank you very much. Anything else, committee? Please continue. Anything else, Ms. Moore? Thank you for the information. It's valuable. And hopefully we can get that second position on. I think that'll be helpful too. So, anything further? Ms. Chambers, do you want to come up and say hello or?
No, but I believe DFS has additional.
Okay, let's move over. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. DFS today is here primarily to answer any questions you may have of us. I know at the last Joint Judiciary meeting, you did ask what were the items our local communities were facing regarding the fingerprint process. And so I wanted to let you know, in August, we sent out a survey to our department staff who require clients or constituents to submit fingerprinting criminal background check for their programs. And kind of consistent with what you've already heard this morning, kind of the sticking point that we learned from our local communities around the state is really the rolling of those fingerprints and then the mail time in order to send in the paper fingerprint cards physically to be processed. And so they have a desire as well to have some sort of electronic solution provided.
Well, thank you for that. Any questions? DFS, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to anyone else under fingerprints and background checks. We have some others of you here. Please come forward. Thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning,
Proceed.
Mr. Chair, Co-Chair, members of the committee. My name is Nicole Hauser. I'm here as the president of the Wyoming Youth Service Association, and I'm also the executive director for Cathedral Home. We presented alongside our counterparts at our last Joint Judiciary meeting, so I just wanted to provide some follow-up as a provider. As an association, we've had the opportunity to meet with DFS, Ms. Campbell, Ms. O'Connor, to discuss their internal process, to understand that from their lens. And we've also had the opportunity to meet with Ms. Moore to discuss DCI and the process that they have to go through. So I would say we are more informed as a provider group about the different steps and requirements that the state departments have to go through. One of the pieces that we're going to work towards, and I just am reporting this to you all, is finding a way to submit our request directly to DCI, just trying to eliminate some of the hands that the physical copies have to go in front of, which we do believe is adding days. No fault to anybody, but as we pass, it has to go here, it has to go here, it has to go here, that adds time. So really working with the state departments to see if there's an opportunity to cut out some of that those timelines. So just wanted to report that to the group since we did testify at our last meeting. Stand for any questions.
We really want to thank our agencies for taking a look in the mirror and working with the provider group. Thank DCI. It's important stuff, we hear about it from our constituents all the time. And so thank you for the work you're doing. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Anything further? Anybody else want to come forward on this background check? It's been valuable information. Thank you. Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Is there anybody streaming in who wishes to comment? Okay. We'll close public comment and move on. We're to the next item on our agenda, consideration of the homelessness and squatting issues in Wyoming. We've spent some time in the first meeting on this. We have a couple of bills for our consideration this morning, committee, and one of which was a bill draft request by one of our senators, and that coincided with the efforts of this committee. So the two chairmen thought that it would be appropriate for the senator to share the work that he's had done with the help of our staff. We will get to that bill here in a moment. I think the senator is going to join us. Hopefully he's online this morning. And we will, if he is, we will take up LSO 002 probably first, so that we can get to the good senator and some testimony that we expect on that. We also have Ms. Urbicite here with the Wyoming Realtors. So kind of one of the important interim topics that we've taken up. So Senator Anderson, is he on board yet this morning?
Mr. Chairman, we don't have him online. We believe we just saw him out in the rotunda. So
Oh,
Pierre
okay,
is
thank you. I did
grabbing
not
him.
realize he came down. That, while we're waiting for him, Brian, I wonder if we take up the fraudulent documents, which was requested by our committee, and if you're okay to maybe walk us through that bill as we wait for the senator to be here. How about that?
You got it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and that is 131.
Yep.
LSO 131.
So, Mr. Chairman, you should have 25 LSO 131. It's 0.5. This is 2-02 in the online meeting materials. This is a bill draft the committee requested in June and would create the criminal offense of using fraudulent documents to gain or remain in possession of property to which the person does not have a right to possess or hold. The staff comment on page 2, there was a question about what do other states have in this regard? And there was very little I could find that specifically outlined the use of documents to gain possession of property. The best example, and this is page 2, beginning on line 9, is New York's larceny statute has a separate provision for basically larceny by deed theft. So the use of an intentionally altered, falsified, or forged document to gain possession of the property. And then on page 3 is federal law concerning the offense for frauds against the United States, which provides, this is page 3, line 5, the use of any writing or other paper knowing it to contain any false or fraudulent statements. So that's kind of some background information on what other states do. And I'll explain more maybe why it was challenging to find specific information later on. So the new criminal offense begins on page 3, line 28 with definitions. Document will mean a writing, whether in physical, electronic, or another form. The term writing is already defined in this article where this new section is placed, and that's the staff comment on the top of page 4. It just defines what writing is. The committee may wish to consider whether that term is sufficient or if there's another term that should be used or defined in lieu of the word writing. And then property, this is page 4, line 19, is just defined as any residential real property that's improved by a dwelling, structure, or other building. So then page 4, line 22 is the offense itself. A person is guilty of a felony punishable by 10 years up to a $10,000 fine or both if the person intentionally uses a document that the person knows or reasonably should know is false or fraudulent to gain or remain in possession of property or to claim a right to property for which the person does not have a legal right to possess or to claim. The staff comment beginning on page 5. So the penalty, where did that come from? That penalty is identical just as a placeholder for the penalty for felony forgery and the possession of forged writings. And that would be a consideration for the committee whether that penalty is appropriate or something else should be placed instead. I've also included the penalty for theft. There's both felony and misdemeanor. The felony theft, which is property valued at $1,000 or more, is that same up to 10 years and a fine up to $10,000. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, I think the big consideration for the committee is this new section vis-a-vis our theft statute, which this committee a few years ago sponsored legislation that was enacted that consolidated all of Wyoming's theft statutes, including one that concerned a specific offense for the wrongful taking or disposing of property. That was previously 63407. That was obtaining, 63403 was the wrongful taking, and then 63407 was a separate section concerning the obtaining of property by false pretenses. So I've included the theft statute there for your reference as well as the statute language for forgery. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd stand for questions on this bill draft.
Mr. Fuller, thank you. Well done as usual. Committee questions about this bill? Any of the draft language, any of the staff comments? Representative Jennings, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, so I guess the part I'm having trouble with is we addressed this a few years ago, and you just gave us the statutes where it was addressed for theft and forgery. And I see on page 5, boy, that looks like that's a pretty good definition of what we're trying to deal with. Why is what we have currently proven to be insufficient? Why are we not prosecuting when I read the penalty here, boy, it sure looks to me like that's fraudulent documents being used to possess property. And I'm just wanting to wrap my mind around why we're trying to take up a little bit more green space in the books.
Mr. Fuller, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, I think at the end of the day, that question may be better directed at the folks who would investigate and prosecute these offenses.
Any further questions on the drafting of this bill? Okay. Let's set this bill aside for the time being. We'll certainly allow for public comment on both of these bills, but in deference to the good senator who drove down this morning and another one of our constituents from our part of the world, we'll move on to an explanation of the second bill. And so, Senator, please come forward. We look forward to your comments on LSO 002, which is a residential property bill, the removal of an unlawful occupant. Interestingly, it's been an issue in our community, Senator, as you know, and you requested a bill draft concurrently with the work that this committee was doing. So we appreciate you sharing your efforts and your thoughts with us regarding this bill. So take it away, and you've got some associates with you this morning. That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. I am Senator Jim Anderson from Casper. Yeah, and as all good legislation goes, this came from a constituent in my area that she was having trouble and needed some help with getting rid of squatters. What we found is that it took an awful lot to get rid of a squatter in Wyoming, that you just couldn't call the sheriff and tell him to kick him out if you were the lawful owner. You had to go through quite a bit of procedure. So what we did, Brian looked up the bill from the successful bill from Florida, and we mirrored ours off of that bill to give the law enforcement the leverage to be able to move in and kick somebody out. The big deal is that instead of them being tenants, they're trespassers. And that's what this bill does, is make them into trespassers and breaking of the law, not tenants that you have to deal with. So that's the crux of the bill, and that's what we're trying to do. And obviously it got a little bigger than that. But we were hoping that the Judiciary Committee would take it as a judiciary bill, so that it would have a little more status in the legislature. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our local realtors that has some experience with this. Ronna Borrow will talk about it.
Well, thank you, Senator. Before we do that, committee, any questions of the senator? Okay, wanted to make sure of that. And Ms. Borrell, thank you for being here. Thanks for making the trip down. And we'd love to hear your input on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Am I doing this right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You are. Get good and close to the microphone.
My name is Ronna Borrell. I have been a real estate broker in Casper since 1975. I purchased my first rental property from Craig Thomas in 1977, and I am here to relate my experience with squatters. My husband and I, like I said, started being a landlord and an active property manager in 1977. My husband and I purchased a residential property at 631 Trygood in Casper in 1989, remodeled it and offered it for lease. We have leased it since. On October 14th, 2021, I leased the home to a Mr., I'm going to call him DR rather than using his name, and his wife. They paid the rent somewhat timely for 6 months. And in April 2022, they applied for and received funding from Wyoming ERAP. Everybody's familiar with that. Mid-November 2022, I learned that the wife had taken off for Wisconsin. He, Mr. DR, told me that he had hired a maintenance guy to do repairs and to clean the property. December 5th, I hadn't received the rent and I hadn't heard from the maintenance guy, so I reached out to the tenant, song and dance. He had also gone to Wisconsin, but assured me that the repairs would be completed and the place would be cleaned. December 28th, after no communication, I went to the property to see if the repairs and cleaning were in fact done. I assumed the property was vacant because DR and his wife were in Wisconsin. I knocked. I opened the door, as I do when I go in to inspect a property, with the key. Men came out of all four corners of the house. One came down the stairs toward me. It was a bi-level home, so he came down that half a flight of stairs. And he came toward me and he asked, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm going to ask you the same thing. Who are you and what are you doing in my property?" Now, this is kind of a key to this squatter thing, the claims that they make. He told me it wasn't my property and that they had signed a lease and given money to the owner. By this time, 3 or 4 other men were standing right behind him. I said it was my property and I had not signed a lease with them and they were trespassing. I asked to see a copy of their lease and he started backtracking. He told the other men that they'd gotten screwed out of their money. That's his words. I told him they needed to get out now, and when I came back, I would come with the sheriff. I did call the officers I know in both the police department and the sheriff's office. Both told me they could do nothing because they didn't have statutory authority. I would have to do a forcible entry and detainer, lovingly known in my business as an FED. I went back to the property the following day, taking a large fellow with me. Luckily, they were gone.
Was that Senator Anderson that you took with you?
It was not Jim. It was not Jim. Luckily, they were gone. The place was trashed. Now, I couldn't tell if it was the tenant before them or the squatters. I'm sure both contributed to the mess. There were filthy mattresses on the floor, drug paraphernalia strewn about, along with clothes and piles of trash. So whoever was cleaning that had come up short. I took pictures, we changed the locks, I wrote work orders to begin putting my property back together. It cost me just under $15,000. I have leased residential properties since 1975. I have never had this experience, and I've gone into a lot of properties with keys. An article in the local online news media carried a story about a Gillette broker who said that there was no problem with squatters in Wyoming because Wyoming people would not put up with them. I called that same news outlet to let them know that that was not true, and that they carried a story on my experience, and things evolved from there. I got lots of calls off of that article, and I talked to Jim, and we began. These are some of my thoughts, just thoughts. 25 LSO Draft 131 version 5 only pertains if a squatter used fraudulent documents to gain possession, and that's the draft that you were dealing with when we walked in. 25 LSO Draft 0002 version 5 pertains only to residential property. Just an editorial comment, I don't know if you have issues with non-residential properties, and if something needs to be dealt with there, I don't know that. Currently, it's difficult to remove a squatter due to lack of clear statutes. Sorry. Again, these are my thoughts. We need a clear definition of a party illegally occupying a property or occupying it without the knowledge and/or consent of the owner. I assume that the use of unauthorized person by LSO has been researched and found the proper term, but I am concerned it may leave gaps by omission. Since my unsettling experience, I've given a lot of thought to this matter. Were I an attorney for an unauthorized person or squatter, I believe I would come at this by attempting to prove some sort of tenancy, whether implied or at sufferance, and thereby garner tenants' rights for my client. I believe the statute should somehow specifically eliminate this possibility of a claim of tenancy in spite of the unauthorized person language, unless the attorney could prove a different set of facts on the ground existed. I am concerned about implied tenancy and tenants' rights that come with that. Points I believe are crucial to consider. Again, squatters should not be considered tenants by inference or omission or lack of applicable legislation. They should specifically not have tenants' rights, and can that be stated in the bill? Clarify the definition of unauthorized person versus squatter versus trespasser, which is a criminal offense, versus tenant versus holdover tenant, so that the ensuing discussions and/or cases aren't able to slip an unauthorized person into one of those other categories. Although not currently contemplated in the draft bill, if subsequent amendments or drafts attempt to require a landlord to serve a notice to pay or quit, or a notice to quit, leave, and vacate to begin the removal process, be sure that the process doesn't infer squatter is a tenant by applying or by requiring a procedure that's normally used with tenants. The other thing is, if you would have to use a notice to pay or quit, then that confers the ability of the squatter to pick up tenancy and also pay and remedy his situation that way. And I think that using an MPQ would imply that the squatter has a right to cure, which you do not want. Full eviction procedure, i.e. a FED. could also imply that the squatter/trespasser/unauthorized person is a tenant. Removing a squatter/trespasser/unauthorized person should not require the full eviction process, should provide for an expedited remedy to remove the squatters or unauthorized person in the property. And I think that bill addresses that, or that draft. Needs to protect the property rights and the owner's rights, and probably speak to recovery of damages. There should be no eviction protection for squatters or trespassers or unauthorized persons, unless, of course, the landlord has done something to mess up the situation. I believe that squatting should be a criminal rather than a civil offense. I believe that we need to review and strike a balance between adverse possession and trespassing. Both carry definitions and collateral information with them. Craft statutes carefully so that adverse possession language, if you're going to use that, does not encourage nor reward trespassing or being an unauthorized person in the property. Squatting should be considered versus adverse possession, under which a squatter is able to gain legal ownership of the property. I'm sure you've done that. We don't obviously want that. Let me see if I can edit some of this. Most of the adverse possession statutes that I read refer to land only. I didn't read one that applied to improved property, either residential or commercial. Law enforcement should be authorized to take immediate action, and I think you've attempted to address that in the process. I believe the squatters should be liable for damages caused by them, including legal fees. I also believe that the definitions and processes that you're considering should include, and I'm out of my wheelhouse here, state-owned and federal or public-owned property, because they do go out and squat on some of that land. So I don't know if that needs to be addressed in this legislation or not. I'm sure that you've reviewed the adverse possession laws, and since I don't read that you're applying that to this legislation, I'm just going to walk on by that. The surrounding states, I reviewed what they do for adverse possession versus squatter rights. I don't think I need to go through that. So in summary, I think the most crucial things are to be sure that the person who's squatting or occupying the property is not somehow by inference or accident inferred to as a tenant. I think that's crucial, because we have to avoid them having tenants' rights, which in Wyoming isn't too onerous, but in other states that carries a lot of baggage. In my case, it would have been really nice to be able to get the first responder, policeman or a sheriff there with me, but they said they couldn't do that. So that's my thoughts and my, I guess, recommendations, and I'd certainly answer any questions if you had any.
Ms. Burrell, thank you. Really comprehensive, and we certainly got an idea of how deep the water can get in a hurry on this. And so I think some of the sentiment of the committee when we first contemplated a draft or two of legislation was to make sure that we got one step or two taken. This may be ongoing work. I mean, this can be very complicated, and it may trickle into next interim, for example, to try to make sure we get it all right. But really commend the senator on his draft bill. I think that's a great start, and we really appreciate all the background you just provided. So thank you, Ronna. That's pretty scary stuff, and it's becoming more prevalent, unfortunately.
It was a tense moment.
I can only imagine, especially when you're there by yourself.
Yeah.
So,
I do think in my initial remarks, I said that somehow use of authorized person, unauthorized person language. I just want to be careful that some smart attorney couldn't come in and say, oh, but I think based on the facts on the ground or the landlord's actions, that my client is able to pick up implied tenancy. Somehow I'd like to see that door closed.
yeah, we don't have any attorneys like that here today.
Okay,
But,
all right, thank you.
I want to get to Ms. Urbicite. Please weigh in if you'd like. We've got two bills here in front of us. By all means, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lori Urbicite with the Wyoming Realtors. And after your last meeting, I did send an email out to all of our 2,500 members across Wyoming and ask if this was a problem in other areas, because I didn't know. And indeed, it is, all across the state. And in all but one county, and in that county, in one small community, they have been told the same thing by law enforcement, that this is a civil matter, that they can't get involved. In one small community in a northern county, there is a sheriff's deputy that will go out and remove them without that necessary legal status. So, but it is happening everywhere. I received emails from Park County, from Albany County, several here in Cheyenne, several in Cheyenne. And I think one of the scariest ones is not only, so first of all, it's private property right. These people are taking your property, and so obviously that needs to stop. But it is a safety issue too for our members. And I think it's appropriate that we're discussing that in September, as it is National Realtor Safety Month. We lose too many realtors across the country because of unsafe situations. And this certainly is that. And I did hear from a young realtor that went to a foreclosure on behalf of a bank, and there were squatters in there. And they had taken a cord and plugged it in, and they were living in a shed, plus they had stolen the water service from the city. I mean, it's a frightening situation. So we think something definitely needs to be done. And I think this is a good first draft, and I'm talking about the 002 draft. My only question on it is on page 4, lines 13 and 14. It requires the date on which the residential dwelling was purchased by the owner. Well, A, not all properties are purchased. B, what difference does it make when it was purchased? If they own it, they own it. And they can prove it with, a copy of their tax deed or tax notice, whatever. So I don't think that is necessary language. And it concerns me because A, not all properties are purchased, they may be inherited. And then on the page 5, where it says the owner acknowledges that an unauthorized person removed, blah, 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 that it may, as a result of this action, the owner may be held liable for actual damages, penalties, costs, and reasonable attorney fees. So I did some checking because I was kind of like, I wonder when I bought my house. And you can go on the Fremont County website, and if you know where to look on the mapping, you can actually see a date there that I assume is when I bought that house. But that's not the case in all counties, and I just don't know that that's a necessary requirement. The whole point of this is to get the people out of the house quickly, to restore the property back to the rightful owner. So I don't know that that makes it any better. And those are my comments, Mr. Chairman. We urge you to keep moving this forward. I understand that another interim study could happen, but in the meantime, that's another full year of people occupying property illegally.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it, Ms. Urbicite. That paragraph on page 5, line 11 through 17, any heartburn with the owner being required to acknowledge, I mean, that goes without saying, right? No owner is going to say, this is my property when it isn't.
Well, one wouldn't think so, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay. Committee, any questions for the Realtor? Ms. Borrell, go ahead.
There may,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Do you have a green light on?
Yes, now.
There you go.
There may be an instance where it could be awkward to prove title in that if you're purchasing a property on a contract for deed and you're not the owner of record, you wouldn't be able to go get a recorded deed. You would probably have a tax notice, but I'm just saying that there may be an instance where an equitable owner is not the owner of record.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions, committee? Anything for the Realtors? Representative Jennings, do you have a question?
Yeah,
Okay,
just,
go ahead.
just a real quick one, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, the one guy that's a hero here in somewhere in the northern part of the state that seems to understand trespass law. How is it that he seems to understand that and get away with it apparently, and the rest of the state can't figure out what trespass means or what's lawful and what's unlawful?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would have to be a question for the law enforcement people themselves.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Rickheiten. We are going to ask for anyone from law enforcement to come up and visit with us about this as soon as we're done with the three of you. Senator, anything you'd like to add on the conversation?
Mr. Chairman, one thing was brought up here was commercial real estate. This is not written for commercial real estate, and we have had 2 instances in my district where commercial real estate was sacked. We also had one down here where vagrants were in it. So there is a need there. They got taken care of by the local law enforcement very quickly, but the residentials do not. So we didn't write it for the commercial real estate.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Anything else for these three, committee? I would like to hear from law enforcement, so stick around if you can. We may have questions for you here in a minute, but by all means, would love to hear from maybe the sheriffs and the chiefs of police who have to deal with this on the ground. And with particular interest to the topic brought up by the representative from Sheridan, who wonders why the laws are not adequate the way they're written now.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Alan Thompson, Executive Director of WASCOP, Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. I do want to add that I believe Sheriff Levi Dominguez might be online today and does wish to testify on this 25 LSO 0002 also. This has been a conversation across the state, especially with the sheriffs. And initially, the concern is this a way of circumventing the 3-day notice to quit and the existing process for removal up to the point of writ of restitution, where the sheriff's office does make sure that no one is in the house and turns the house over to the rightful owner through a court process. I'm not aware of any processes where a private individual comes in and makes a statement or a claim, or files a form that gives law enforcement the authority to remove someone from a house without some sort of oversight from the court system. And I think this causes some question on that difference that we were talking about earlier. If someone has illegally entered in a residence, then they're a trespasser, and that's a criminal violation, and we would believe that we have the authority in law enforcement to take action in that. But as we look through the wording in this statute, one of the questions that we have is, will this apply directly after a 3-day notice to quit of a tenant? You have a tenant in there in a property, and they've given a 3-day notice to remove themselves from the property. So after 3 days, they've refused to remove themselves from the property. Then does the sheriff have the authority to come in and remove the person after a 3-day notice? Typically, this involves a court process and then the culmination of a writ of restitution. And then the question that was asked earlier is if is it trespassing or is it a landlord-tenant dispute? And I would submit that the majority of law enforcement that answers this in the the fact that it's a civil issue and you're gonna have to take care of it through the eviction process is because that's what they're advised by their attorneys. So I would like to hear from any city attorneys or county attorneys or district attorneys on this matter. Something that we discussed briefly amongst sheriffs, but I think that this is a good topic to have some input from our council that advises us on a daily basis. Later on in this statute, it shows that law enforcement is kind of exempt from immunity if they are acting upon a reasonable belief that somebody has the lawful right to this property and ask the sheriff to remove them. But I think our law enforcement's concern is just because it's in law that says that we're immune doesn't mean we're actually immune. If we're circumventing the existing eviction process from someone that's a tenant, previously a tenant, is there that liability for law enforcement and then the property owner? So it's just something that we have a lot of questions about. And I guess we would hope that differentiating between a trespasser that has no legal right to be in that house and a tenant that has defaulted on an agreement. And we believe that those are two totally separate things.
So, Mr. Thompson, it strikes me that if we move this forward, and I hope we do continue forward with at least an initial shot at this problem that's kind of surfaced here recently, maybe your group can help draw that line for us. I mean, so I hope you'll be giving that some thought, and I agree, we need to rely on our legal minds among us too. This can get, like I said, the water can get pretty deep in a hurry off the bank when you jump into this one. But I will say that constituents up in my neck of the woods, this is a pretty hot button issue. And I've had a couple of them ask why we couldn't just write this into the Castle Doctrine statutes. You know, there's that kind of passion about this issue of people, you know, coming home from Arizona, for example, after the winter and finding somebody in their home. You know, when it happens to somebody like Ms. Borrell, it really brings it home to everybody. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And you mentioned that you may have someone on with us this morning who'd like to testify. I think we got someone there. Welcome. Let's go to testimony from who we have streaming in, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Levi Dominguez, Sheridan County Sheriff. Can you all hear me okay?
We can, yeah. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. I'm here, Sheridan County Sheriff, and then on behalf of I'm president of the Wyoming Sheriff's Association. And I first want to apologize, you know, that I can't be there in person. I have some other meetings this afternoon and this evening that I have to be here for here in Sheridan. But I greatly appreciate you allowing me to speak here remotely. And also want to thank Senator Anderson and Ms. Merrill and Ms. Urbakite for giving a little bit more background onto what they were looking at, seeing as this bill could be moved forward in the future. Because sheriffs, as I represent the sheriffs here in Wyoming, we did have some concern with that. And Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I know you had mentioned, you know, things of if somebody comes back from wintering, you know, in Arizona and coming, you know, to their home where they come and stay in the summertime, you know, and finding somebody in there. I don't know of an instance where that would not be a law enforcement issue of a clear, cut, dry trespassing issue where, you know, law enforcement would take action as necessary. I think what's, you know, we're seeing right now is what Ms. Merrill had mentioned, you know, some of those, you know, integral parts of, you know, being a property manager or a property owner or landlord or something of what to go forth. And when most of the sheriffs had read this bill, 25 LSO 0002, you know, we're reading it as this is trespassing. You know, this is trespassing, emails back and forth. Why can't we deal with this trespassing wise? And I can see where, you know, there might be some muddy waters with what Ms. Merrill and her experience was moving forward. And so, you know, initially looking at this this mirrors a lot of what criminal trespass, criminal entry is. And so why muddy those waters, but I can see where we're trying to clean that up. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your willingness to say maybe we're not quite ready to, make this what we need to, but work together with not only Wyoming sheriffs, but all Wyoming law enforcement as a whole, because there are some of those concerns, as mentioned with what Executive Director Thompson had mentioned. A primary concern is, are we going to see individuals try to circumvent an already existing civil process with the eviction process? And that's one of our concerns in utilizing law enforcement prior to, these individuals going through the proper civil process for eviction. I guess that's one of the big concerns that we had moving forward. And another big concern is that in this bill, I heard of the speakers talking about law enforcement. This is a trespassing issue. Law enforcement needs to, respond and take action. But in the bill, it primarily just states sheriff, the sheriff shall, and it puts a lot of onus and responsibility on county sheriffs when, there's other, law enforcement agencies within those jurisdictions that can potentially respond to this as well. And so I think it would be wise for Wyoming law enforcement as a whole, WASCOP getting together, assisting with moving this bill forward to meet all the needs of everybody involved, not only the realtors and the property owners, but law enforcement, the county attorneys, to move forward to see how we can make this bill move forward. Those were some of the big concerns that we had as sheriffs here in Wyoming. And I would suggest that, I know we talk about, is this trespassing or not? Maybe we look at putting this bill into bolstering our criminal trespass and defining what is a trespasser. And then that would incorporate all law enforcement to be able to respond appropriately when requested to do so, especially in a case like with what Ms. Merrill had brought forth, because I do understand her concerns and want to know that, want to reiterate, we share those concerns with her. And that's all I have, unless there's any other questions.
Levi, thank you very much for being here, and I appreciate your thoughts on this. I think the reason that the senator singled out sheriffs in this bill is just that we hold you in such high regard. So that's the deal. So thank you again. Any questions, committee? Well, the Sheridan County representative. Take it away.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Mr. Dominguez, so as I listen to your testimony, you apparently can figure out that somebody comes home and they're squatters and they're trespassers. And yet, when we hear the testimony on the other side, apparently nobody in the state, except for one person in one community or somewhere, has figured out that. Can you tell me the discrepancy there? How can you figure that out? And why are they not being able to get anyone in law enforcement to actually prosecute or go after the squatters as trespassers? Because even if we leave out all the other things that might be happening, there's certainly enough cases where somebody comes home from Arizona or they're a homeowner and they own that property and they walk into an unsafe circumstance. So how do you determine that, and why can't the rest of the people determine that?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings. Appreciate that question. And I think looking at what we said, that example of somebody coming home from Arizona, coming into their home that they plan on living in and being in there for a certain period of time, and somebody who they have not given permission, or their property manager giving permission to be in that home, is trespassing. And I think every law enforcement, while I can't speak for every law enforcement agency in Wyoming, would probably see that as trespassing. I think that the gray area lies in with when there is a renter or somebody that there is a contract with a property owner to rent that home or that property, and then now they're allowing other people to supposedly rent or live in that property, as maybe with the case with Miss Merrill, where individuals had left that were the renters on that contract, and potentially then told other people, well, you can stay here because I'm renting that property, while they haven't, been paying rent or those things. That could potentially be some of that gray area of that underlying of where law enforcement agencies might say, well, this is, as somebody who is a renter and within that contract, allows somebody to stay in that home, that might be the defining issue that we might have to look at as a whole and as a group moving forward.
Representative, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't the scenario wouldn't that kick it over to fraud? They were trying to take someone's property fraudulently. And so it seems to me like you got two things. Trespasses, clearly, I don't understand why law enforcement doesn't show up for these things. I mean, that's what we're hearing. And two, if it falls into the other category, it seems to me like that now falls into fraud because they're defrauding someone of their property.
So Sheriff Dominguez, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I could comment, a little bit on that, Mr. Chairman and Representative Jennings. Like Executive Director Thompson said, I think it'd be wise to get county attorneys involved in this discussion a little bit more of what that looks like. But moving forward, yeah, particularly there could potentially be fraud. And I think the other, when you're looking at the other bills that are set forth, the 25 LSO, 0131, is somewhat within that moving forward. But when you're trying to defraud somebody, yeah, it's potentially, but is it the individual that was renting the property that's now defrauding that individual? Or is it the person that was there who said, well, the person that was renting this property allowed me to be here? And so those are questions and defining factors that I think we need to move forward together collectively to define this better, whether we do it in criminal trespass or we do it within this bill. But I think there definitely needs to be some work done together so that way law enforcement, property owners, and the county attorneys, we can all move forward. So that way there is consistent enforcement action taking place across the state, because I think that's important, is making sure that it's consistent across the state so we don't have some of these questions raised in the future.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Sheriff, for your testimony. Have your officers faced any legal consequences or appeals for handling any of the squatter cases that you have engaged in?
Sheriff, go ahead.
No, none of my deputies here within Sheridan County have faced any consequences of such. While we haven't had, cases similar to what Ms. Merrill has described, our action and our stance is on the case of coming back from Arizona and coming to your home and somebody's there is a trespassing, and that's how Sheridan County views it.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. And have those cases been prosecuted, or what has the county attorney's office done with that once you've made an arrest for trespassing?
Sheriff?
Yeah, we haven't had many of those cases where somebody comes back, who's wintered in other places. So I can't specifically speak to numbers that we've had, moving forward. But, typically when we have trespassing cases that we're prosecuting, the county attorney's office is taking those and prosecuting those. I can't speak to a similar, any particular case that is within that realm of people coming in that particular case. That's just how I would view it and how our law enforcement and sheriff's office views it.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, committee? Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to speak on either one of these bills? We have another gentleman online. Let's go there, and then we'll come back to the room. I can't quite read the name, so please introduce yourself. Is it Clayton? Is that? Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, my name is Clayton Malinkovich. I'm actually here. My intent today was to testify on the state's right of appeal, and I will stick around for that. But listening in and having this conversation, and it sounds as the committee specifically requested to hear from those who advise sheriff's deputies and sheriff's offices. So I figured I'm here. I'm more than happy to chime in. With regards to this unauthorized person statute, to echo the testimony from Sheriff Dominguez, this does create a substantial burden for sheriff's offices. I can't speak for my sheriff, but I do I can speak about the situation in Sublette County, and I know that this is a common situation throughout the state. Many sheriff's offices right now are understaffed and they're running short shifts as it is right now. This creates an additional situation where, in the way that the statute reads, creates a burden on the sheriffs because it says the sheriff shall verify the person who submitted the complaint is the record owner. This creates essentially putting them in the place of a title clerk. Yes, we get these type of phone calls from sheriff deputies in the field all the time. If somebody's at a house and they're calling saying, hey, this person is here, what do we do? My advice and my office's advice to these folks is address it through the criminal trespass statute. Our criminal trespass statute requires notice, and that notice can be given there in person or it can be posted. And so in the event that that notice is there, and or if the record owner is there, or the person who can show that sheriff's deputy some verification that they're or some type of information that they are the owner, this could be addressed straight through the criminal trespass statute. And I don't see a need for it. Additionally, members of the committee, I would want to draw your attention to Title 34, to 34-128, that specifically notes that we do not have implied tendencies in Wyoming except for tendencies by sufferance. And a tendency by sufferance, by operation of law, has to have resulted from a legitimate tendency in the first place. So we've already addressed this. Please don't take this, anyone to discount the person's testimony from Casper that had this experience. By all means, I understand that would be a harrowing experience. But we already don't allow these types of tendencies in Wyoming. And so I'm wondering if this might be a solution in search of a problem. And I would stand for questions on that. And then I also had a brief comment on the forged writing, if you all would take that as well.
I hope I pronounced that correctly, and we appreciate you weighing in. Committee, any questions of the county attorney from Sublette? Any questions? Okay, thank you. Please offer any other testimony. You said you had a little bit more on the other bill or another topic?
On the forged writing to obtain property proposed statute, I just wanted to chime in very briefly. When we're looking at that, yes, you all consolidated the theft statute, which depends on the day we county attorneys grumble about, and on other days we are grateful for it. So it's kind of a mixed bag. With regards to the application of that statute, with the obtaining of the real estate, it appears that this same issue could be resolved by including real estate in the group of things that make it a felony. We already have livestock and firearms, regardless of the value of that livestock or the firearm. Candidly, if the theft statute were to simply include that was obtaining real estate or some type of claim of possession as a felony, that would resolve this issue, because the theft statute already has the obtaining property by deceit. So that's my only thought on that. And then while I have your ear, I would note that $1,000 in 2024 is not the same as $1,000 in 2004, I believe was the last time you all updated your felony lines for all of the property destruction, so on and so forth. In today's dollars, that's about $1,600 now. So if you're looking at things to update, that might be one to look at as well. So thank you, and if there's any other questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I steal Representative Crago's goat, then since that's agriculture, is that a felony?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I'll take that as a question to me.
Might depend on what you want to do with it. Go ahead, Mr. Malinkovich.
It's good to see you again, Representative Provenza. Yes, agriculture, if it's livestock, it is a felony, regardless of the value of the goat. but I've never seen a goat that wasn't worth more than $1,000.
Thank you to our county attorney for answering that. Anything further for the county attorney from Sublette? Again, we really appreciate you weighing in, and thank you for that, Clayton. So any further testimony? We've got somebody here in the room. Please come forward. Captain, good to see you.
Good morning, Chairman and committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Jeremy Tremmel, and I'm a captain with the Casper Police Department. I would note that some of the scenarios provided are pretty clear that we could say are trespassing if you show up at your home and somebody's there who has no legal authority to be there and no information to support them being in the residence. Unfortunately, those are not the types of calls that our law enforcement officers respond to most of the time. Certainly, if our law enforcement officers respond to vacant residence where somebody has set up camp, and those are a lot easier to sort through and parse those out as a trespassing issue. Where we see problems are in cases where people have been allowed to live in residence, or somebody had leased the property, somebody else allows them to be a roommate, or they say that they were a roommate. And so having an officer trying to determine lease agreements and who actually has interest in the property and whether they could even go into the property legal as an officer at that time are all questions that I don't think are clearly articulated with some of the questions that have been presented here today.
So, Captain, I do have this question. What we've been presented with this year in this interim topic is the problem that for some reason our statutes are not adequate. I'm hearing some conflicting testimony this morning that, well, they kind of are, but we don't want to respond, and we would prefer somebody go through the 6 or 8 week or 6 month process of going through the courts and whatever. That concerns me too. I mean, so can you help me understand your take on whether or not, do we have the proper statutes in place now to take care of a situation that was described by Ms. Morrow? You can't get rid of anybody, and so you call law enforcement, and for some reason, law enforcement is reluctant to be able to do something about that, is what I'm hearing. What's your take?
Yeah, Chairman, committee, I'm not exactly sure on her specific situation, and it could have, I don't even know whether an officer responded or whether the information provided to our dispatchers were such that our dispatchers parsed it out and said, hey, this sounds like a civil issue and we're not even going to send an officer. So I'm not sure in that specific case. Certainly if officers did respond, depending on what information was provided, they may be able to parse through that. But we get a lot of calls related to civil issues day in and day out, and a lot of those are parsed out before they even make it to the officer level based off of information that is provided.
Okay, thank you. Anything, committee? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After looking through this bill, I really think this bill gets at what we need because of the definitions. The unauthorized person, I think, is the magic key here, because I think where the issues have been in the past have been tenant versus unauthorized person. And when you have the tenant issues, I think that's where we get into problems with law enforcement not wanting to get involved, and it is a process. And I've talked to some people even in my area that are dealing with this. Evicting someone, you've got to go through the process. To me, this unauthorized person, I think, kind of gives law enforcement a little bit more teeth because it's immediate removal and you don't have to go through that whole process. So that's where I think this bill might be what we're looking for. I do think it's been brought up in a couple of different areas that maybe it doesn't have to be the sheriff, because really at the beginning of the bill, it talks about law enforcement. So I think it could be I think we could expand that to anybody in law enforcement. But what's your thoughts on that?
Chief, go ahead.
Chairman, Senator Schuler, thank you. A couple thoughts. One, I would be willing, our agency works closely with WASCOP and other agencies around the state, and we certainly would be inclined to provide our input. I'm not sure that just by putting the definition of unauthorized in here, depending on how that ends up after will be sufficient, depending on who does the authorization of that person. And so that could pose a question when officers are responding and trying to determine that on the fly. Again, I think there's a number of even attorneys on this panel that would tell you how difficult it is to parse through property issues and leases. And so having officers make those determinations in the field could expose them, to legal problems where they didn't have the authority to do certain things. And so, if it's spelled out clearly in statute, that's one thing. But hopefully that answers your question.
Mr. Tribble, I didn't mean to call you chief either. You're captain. Chief,
Chairman, thank you for
one
that.
day,
Thank
maybe
you for the
one day
effort.
soon. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Anything else for the captain? Okay, thanks much. Any further testimony that anyone wants to come forward on either one of these bills? Please come forward. Mr. District Attorney, appreciate you being here. And shine some light on this for us, if you would.
Committee members, I'll surely try. My name's Dan Itzen. I'm the district attorney out of Casper. The forged writings bill that deals with deeds and things, I agree with Representative Jennings that it's one of two things in my estimation. I think the county attorney in Sublette County hit it on the head as well. Either that can be prosecuted as a theft or a forgery itself. If you look at the forgery statute, it's uttering any known writing that's forged, essentially. So when you hand someone the forged document, you may not have forged it yourself, but it's still a forgery. I don't think we have to change any language in that statute to cover real estate. I think when you start to look at the definitions that we have in theft, that can be handled that way, and clearly can be handled under the forgery statute. With respect to the squatters issue, I think is a little bit different. We're not talking about coming home to your primary residence and lo and behold, the family's moved in. Those things are very simple to resolve themselves. Clearly, that's a trespassing issue. I think when Senator Schuler talked about, having property and property interests and those things in renters, one may have rented to an individual who then moves out and tells his buddies, hey, move in, no big deal. And then the property owner and the landowner, for whatever reason, go collect the rent or drive by their property thinking it's vacant. Lo and behold, here are these individuals. The question then law enforcement is faced with is what property interest do these new squatters have? Did anything convey when their buddy said, hey, move into the place last month? That's the issue I think that the bill addresses. And I think that's where it needs to address those issues. I think by definitions and things, it's a very workable bill. Sometimes the question of, well, how come the county attorney just doesn't say, go forth and charge? A lot of times, you get these phone calls, and it's like at midnight. And it sounds like a law school exam question. And you start with, well, you know what I was doing 3 minutes ago? I was sleeping. And I think part of being a good counselor is being cautious and taking narrow steps. You don't want to give advice to your law enforcement partners that get them sued. Do they know everything at midnight that's going on? Probably not. Do you want to step out on that ledge and say, yep, go do this? Probably not. When they're saying, yes, I paid my friend rent, I have a legal basis to be here, and then you have the homeowner going, no, they don't, and here's why. Those, I think, are important things to consider, and I think county attorneys do consider those when offering advice to issues. And I think sometimes that's where you hear that can be a civil issue. That's something we have to deal with down the road. What that means to the property owner, essentially, is those folks are going to stay in that house for an extended period of time until that issue's, no, it's not a civil issue, it's a criminal issue. Or yes, it is a civil issue, and you go through that process. I think that's what this bill attempts to shine light on or alleviate a little bit. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thanks for the definition there, sir. So if you have a squatter and they have a lease or contract, do not the lease contract say you don't get to sublease? And so at that point, wouldn't it turn into a fraudulent case? Which again comes back to, I appreciate what you said before. I find it interesting, you know, that some county attorneys have figured this out, and some sheriffs and some chief polices. But it seems like that's the real crux of this. You know, we want to get at squatters, and I can see that becomes a civil case in some places. And so you would want to be cautious in what you told your law enforcement to go at midnight. But it seems like that it very easily would fall over into, you know, did they, if they have a lease, didn't it say you don't get to subcontract? I mean, isn't that a standard thing? I don't know, I haven't done that a lot. Maybe you could answer that part of it. Seems like it falls under fraudulent to me.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, I think the answer is a firm maybe. My experience is a lot of these leases or these agreements may have started out on paper, but when law enforcement shows up or those things, there is not necessarily an agreement on paper. And kind of what that means. I know individuals that rent homes that started out with a year-long contract. And boy, they're good tenants, and we just didn't renew the contract, and he just pays his rent month to month now. So a lot of times you don't necessarily have those things in writing and in place. You have people saying, oh yes, you know, I agreed with my friend, I've got it written down here somewhere. And here you are as the homeowner and law enforcement dealing with, well, yeah, I got something somewhere, but I can't find it, and those things. If you do have a lease, and each lease is different, is the other answer to this, I'm afraid. Yes, sometimes those provisions are in lease agreements.
So, Mr. District Attorney, these two bills, if they were to move forward and be considered and worked all the way through next February, are you comfortable that they might be a positive addition to our statutes from your office's standpoint? And do you think it would help law enforcement if we provide a little more specificity?
Mr. Chairman, the short answer is yes, sir. I think it adds some concrete basis for law enforcement to act.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, committee? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Easton, really appreciate you coming down today.
I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else want to testify on either one of these bills? Fraudulent documents or the property removal of unlawful occupant? Any other testimony? Okay, I'm going to close testimony on these bills. Committee, with regard to 002.5, the residential property removal of an unlawful occupant bill, what is your pleasure on that bill presented by Senator Anderson this morning? Moved by Senator Cooper and seconded by Senator Schuler. Discussion. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, just a question. This is really kind of the first time we've seen this bill. Are you actually asking for a motion on the final disposition, or are we going to move?
I was going to suggest, Senator, thank you for bringing that up. We could, work the bill and hold it over for one more meeting. And that's part of why we brought it up at this meeting, because we do meet again in November. That's kind of up to the committee, depending upon how comfortable we are with where we are with the bill. Does that kind of go to what you're talking about? Senator, go ahead on that.
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, I'm getting mixed messages from the people testifying on this, and I'm definitely thinking that I was hopeful that perhaps with Senator Anderson's leadership and anybody on his committee, that they could get together and work on the bill and present us with a different version at our next meeting. And I just think, we got some folks say it's real workable, some that say it's not. And I don't know that we could sort that out easily without putting a lot of effort into it. And this is new on our radar, 20 minutes ago. So I was kind of hoping we could do that and see another version next time.
I will say, committee, that both of these bills, this is the first that we've had the opportunity to look at them. We have discussed this issue in that first meeting and again today. But I appreciate where the senator's coming from, and we could consider that. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did something similar in joint education, and I don't think that the motion, basically what we ended up on was that we shouldn't motion to work a bill unless we're going to vote on that motion.
I agree.
And so I think if the intention is not to move the bill, then we can talk about amendments. I don't think there's anything barring us from having discussion about this bill. But procedurally, I'm being a stickler here, and I think maybe we should talk about how we want to work the bill without motioning it.
I think that if we wanted to discuss a little bit whether or not we want to vote on this bill today, would the bringer of the motion be willing to withdraw the motion? And would the second go along with that for the time being? Okay, that's been done. So now we're back on the discussion as to whether or not the committee feels like we should work this bill and give it an up or down vote, or what say you? Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see us make a motion, because I think we heard from the county attorney that made a lot more sense of taking this and just crafting it into adding residential or adding property into the already theft and the statutes that's already there and making it a felony. It seems like that's a much cleaner fix and a much quicker fix to be looked at.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I think that's
if he's never seen a goat that was not worth $1,000, what piece of real estate's not worth $1,000? I don't think it makes a lot of sense to add real estate into the list of property that's always going to be considered a felony if it's stolen, because it's always going to be $1,000 or more.
And Representative Jennings, I think that your comments are well taken, but does that not pertain more specifically to 131, the fraudulent documents bill, as opposed to the removal of an unlawful occupant? I believe that's what the reference was to the addition of real estate into the, is it not? Which one of the bills are you referring to?
Mr. Chairman, I agree that 131, it certainly would fit better there. But I think we could ask staff to look at that and see if we can apply it also on the other one. I mean, since we have it in front of us, at least we have an opportunity to look at a couple of things, not just this bill.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Case.
I'm not sure I see how theft fits into the bill about trespass. They're not saying the property's theirs. They're just saying they have a right to be there. So I'm not getting that part.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my opinion, my thoughts on this, as far as the broader concepts, when we're discussing it, and I think it is a good discussion, but I personally don't like trying to make it fit in a theft, because I don't think that makes sense. I don't think that's what it is. You know, we understand when you're saying a person can't go take property from somebody else. That's a concept. I think criminal law is always cleaner and better if it's kept to smaller, concrete, concise concepts that say, this is what is prohibited. And I think that is a part of this bigger discussion, and partly why I disagree with some of my, I don't know if disagree, maybe strong, but with some of the county attorneys and prosecuting attorneys that testified, because I prefer keeping them, like if we go forward and we say, this is the concept that we're trying to prohibit. You can't use this false document to squat. Then that's really clear what's prohibited in our law. When we try to be creative, is what, you know, kind of we call it creative charging, then first of all, that creates problems with prosecution. It creates problems with, and this is to everyone's benefit, I think. What is the prohibited conduct? And if that's clear, that's concise. So that's what, to me, we're looking at. This is a different type of situation that we're trying to say that is illegal in the criminal context. So I like it being its own separate thing, saying this is prohibited conduct, not trying to make it fit theft, not trying to make it fit trespass if trespass is something different. That's my thoughts on these bills generally.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just, if we were voting on the bills today, I think I'd have to vote no, because they're not ready. There's a lot of inconsistencies within all of these. I think there's some things we got to work on if we're going to push these ideas forward. For example, in the second bill draft we were talking about, 002, there is a similar provision that relates, it's almost identical to the other bill draft that we're looking at, except it's a misdemeanor versus a felony, which it is in the bill draft. It's on its own, creating a new crime. We're creating a new crime in the other bill draft, but it's a misdemeanor. And then I would also note, I mean, and this is something we're gonna have to work around. If you go look at the FED statutes, there's actually a provision that I believe applies directly to squatters, and it's been used by, I know of people in the legal, in the legal field to protect interests of people who are quote unquote squatters. And I think that's what we really got to get to is how do we protect the property rights, the landowner, because that's our ultimate goal. And that, my point being is we may have to go in and look at the FED statute too when we're doing this, or we're going to have inconsistencies within our own green books. And depending on, which judge you get or which lawyer you use, you might be successful, you might not be. And so I think we need to make that very clear too, because that's part of the problem that law enforcement has to deal with on a daily basis is they look at this and they pull out, their county attorney reads to them the FED statute that has that provision in it. And that's where, sometimes there's a lot of gray area there, and I think we need to clean that up. And so that might take some work. I think we can do it, but between now and our next meeting, maybe some of us could, work on that, have some phone calls or Zoom calls or something and work on that together.
Yeah, I think that's wise counsel, Mr. Co-Chairman. I think I'd be inclined to see if we couldn't ask a group to put their heads together. I hesitate to call it a working group or a subcommittee or we get all sorts of things going on in the legislature, but I think those who could maybe work with Mr. Fuller to either come up with one bill out of these two or, clean up each one. I do think that's pretty wise counsel, committee. I think that's what we should do. I think this is important enough that I would like to see us come out of this interim with something. This is a nationwide issue that we're reading more and more about. It's a big deal, and we are a private property state. So I think it's important that we hopefully could get somewhere with this issue. Does that make sense? Who was first? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess one thing I would ask when we put this group together, I know we've heard we want county attorneys, potentially sheriffs on there. if at all possible, maybe it's someone from legal aid, someone who can look at it and say, you know, how this might impact a tenant, like potentially a lawful tenant. I just don't want to accidentally write a bill that could negatively impact renters, because, I mean, more than half of my constituents are renters. And so I think we just want to make sure we stay in the lane we intend to, and we don't accidentally go too far astray and potentially impact the rights of people that are lawfully renting, but have to go through a process with their landlord.
I appreciate that, and I think a representative from Albany County would do a great job of representing that viewpoint. So, yeah. So is there anyone on the panel who would be willing to spend we're past the busy times, so going into the fall and before our November 5th or 10th meeting, we're right in there. Is there anyone who would be willing to take a look at this and serve with Representative Oakley? Thank you. That would be terrific. Representative Provenza, would you be willing to tie into this a little bit?
As long as we're meeting when I'm not door knocking.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else?
Somebody's volunteering.
Representative, yeah, there you go. Thank you. Representative Crago, thank you. Senator Anderson, obviously you'd be willing or more than welcome to sit in with this group or continue to work on it. Maybe the two co-chairmen would sit in on this meeting and meet with Mr. Fuller. The sheriffs and chiefs, I'm looking back, I think it's really important that maybe you be looped in. If we can get our county attorneys, district attorneys, we would really appreciate that group and input. But let's work these, and let's see if we can't come back in our November meeting with something that we're a little more comfortable, maybe targets a little more specifically. Or Representative, you willing to sit in on it? Yes. Okay, that sounds good. So did we get everybody who volunteered on that group? Okay. And anyone else who has specific kinds of input, please feel free to share that with Mr. Fuller, and we'll try to pull this together and get a draft in plenty of time so that we can get a look at it for the November meeting. I want to thank the folks from Casper who drove down, and thank you, Ms. Borrell. Appreciate your time to help bring this into pretty stark relief as to what can go on out there. Senator, thank you too. Anything else, committee on homelessness, squatting issues? I think we've offered for public comment, but anybody who would like to step up and make any further comment is welcome to do so. Okay. I think we've come to a lunch break, and we can come back to the issue of follow-up with issues from that first meeting. Mr. Thompson, is that okay with you? Are you good to stay over the lunch hour and come back? Okay, and we'll jump back into that when we get back after an hour and 15 minutes. Let's come back at 1 hour and 15. So that takes us to 1:30, right? 1:30. Okay, we'll be back at 1:30.